We'll put our phones down and 10 up. Thank you. Look, welcome to the Infrastructure and Projects Committee meeting today, the 5th of August. We have a very full agenda, so we're going to be going flat out to get through it all, and we will make one amendment to that agenda, so I'll just get you to note, please. We will bring alternative water, which is tab 12, or item 12 on the agenda, up to item 6, which is after the parking abstention policy. So we've got some staff that need to be away later, so we want to just get that covered off prior. So they will note that. I don't need a mover for that. No. Okay. So welcome to those on live stream. You've had the agenda. Are there any? Yes, we have apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Ludlow, Councillor Broad and Councillor Kett. Could I have a mover and seconder? Thanks, Leslie and Rhea. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Declarations of interest in relation to the agenda today. Any? No, there's no one for that. We don't have anyone in public forum. And so our first item, and we do have two people that are going to submit to us at the top table. So on parking abstention policies, so I'd ask firstly Chris, if he's here, if you'd like to come up and talk to your submission, please. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, councillors. If I could direct your attention to page 6 of the parking exemptions policy, that's what I wanted to discuss with you today. So starting at the bottom, guest parking at council premises. When I spoke at the annual plan, parking would have been fantastic if that had been supplied. My wife wanted to come along because she'd never been to a council meeting before. Her back is fused with titanium, so she can walk long distances, but not quickly. So of course I was like, right, we'll go into town early and we'll get there. And of course, as it happened, we got to park right outside the Civic. So we're here ridiculously early. But if parking had been provided, that would have been an absolutely brilliant thing. As it was, because we're here so early and there was a few submitters who didn't actually show up, staff approached me a couple of times and said, hey, look, can you go up and speak early because we're missing someone? I was like, yeah, not a problem. So it streamlined the whole process for you guys as well. So there's an advantage to having that facility there and moving things along. So I'd love to see that, actually. The vehicles on council business, one of the things that struck me here was obviously all your staff vehicles are in your exemption database, but when it comes to councillors, it mentions that you've got designated free parking across the road and that your vehicles will also be in the permit exemption database. I just thought, well, why don't you streamline that and just put all of the vehicles in the database in the same category? So if someone's on council work and is actually employed by council, that's fine. They need to park somewhere, they can. But what about councillors? What if you're consulting on the annual plan down at South Alive or over at the stadium? It's a long walk from your parks here. So if your vehicles are already in the database, why not just have the same rule for all the vehicles in the database, and might make, consulting a bit easier. And I imagine most of you, wherever you go, get hit up about a certain burnt out building in the middle of town. So if you want to stop and engage with the public about that, and you're 5 minutes over and some industrious council employee comes along and gives you a ticket, that's not really fair because you're engaging with the ratepayers. That's what we want you to do. So you shouldn't really be getting parking tickets for things like that. And the recognition of service. Now, I realise this is quite a contentious issue because I've read the submissions and the comments online, and we won't go into that, but I also see you've got a recommendation in your agenda today to just scrap that altogether. Can I just say, admittedly, the way it's written here, I couldn't support it. It's very vague and there's really no transparency. What about tying it to your civic awards? Because that way people who have done long service for the council on either side of the table, you can recognise them through your civics awards and go, hey, look, here's a little something you can park in our city for the rest of your life for free because you've done the service to the city. And that way the ratepayers have transparency and, you're giving a little bonus to the people who have put all the time and effort into the city. So that's all I've got to say. So if there's any questions, the floor's over to you.
Yeah, we will take questions. Thanks, Chris, for that submission. Any councillors have any questions for Chris? Alex?
Thanks, Chair. Can you just clarify that first part of your submission on the page 6 there, the guest parking at council premises? Currently it's Zone 1, and so you've got Zone 1 parks just along here and that kind of thing. So what is it specifically that you're looking for there?
Well, if you're going to provide parking for like people submitting on your annual plan, it would be, I think it's a brilliant idea and you should definitely do it. That's
awesome.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Did someone else have a question? No. Thank you, Chris, for some
Thank you.
Sorry, Alan.
Well said, Chris. Yeah.
Thank you, Alan.
Great submission, yeah.
Okay, next we have Carolyn.
Sorry. The chair's a bit low. Hope I can get up again.
Could someone just adjust that mic, please? Thanks, Rhiannon.
Yeah, I'm not that tall.
Welcome, Carolyn. Thank you. You're somewhat of a regular here at our public forum, so it's good to see you again.
Kia ora, thank you. I just want to talk about a couple of things with regards to the parking exemption policy. Of course, we have mentioned already about our concern about providing free parks for people who've done good service, and whilst we agree about some recompense for people doing good service to the city, I don't know anybody that has actually said they would agree with the free parking, but our major concern was conflict of interest. Invercargill being a small city means that it's hard to not have some conflict of interest at some time during a meeting. But there's two issues that have been brought to my attention since I wrote the submission, and one was to do with one of our members. He had just recently lost his driver's licence because he can't drive anymore. He's over 80 and he was getting the over 80 free parking. And of course, he can walk a wee bit, but you know, he doesn't have a physical disability, but he does now have vision impairment. And he was saying that he can't go in his car now and get, say, a caregiver or his son or something to come and drive him into town and get free parking anymore, because even though he's over 80 and he knows he would only have the exemption until it ran out, he wonders why he can't finish the exemption until it runs out, and then he'll stop having it. But yeah, there's just something that no one has thought about. The other issue is my sister has one eye. She had melanoma 6 years ago and had to have her eye taken out, so she can park and she can drive quite easily on the roads and everything. But one thing she doesn't have is 3D vision, the same as I don't have 3D vision. So if you've only got one eye and you can't see out of the other eye for various reasons, you don't have 3D vision. And that means that you can't identify how long a distance is. So you might be next to a pole in the parking building, but you can't identify how far, and it looks closer than it might be, or it looks further away than it might be, and you're likely to be. So my sister really struggles to park in car parks, buildings, and when she's down here, and she's coming down quite a few times just now because she's having surgery down here as well as looking after her eye socket, and she is a bit concerned about where to park in town, as there's not that many parks in the city. If she's got me in the car, she can park in the mobility parks, but if she's by herself, other than parking at the local shop where there's no parking building, she's really quite restricted on what's available. And so people like her, and she's not the only one with one eye, of course, probably a little bit concerned about where can they park safely, especially if it's only longer than, say, half an hour, because you might bang into the pot, into the, oh, sorry, they might bang into the wire, not the wire, the concrete pillar, because it's too close or too far and you just can't identify where it is. So my sister prefers to park out on the street. She knows that she's safe there. So I just wondered if it was something that the council needs to consider, those two issues. Okay?
Okay. Thanks, Caroline. Are there any questions? Yes, we've got one from Trish.
Good to see you, Carolyn. It's Trish Boyle speaking. Carolyn, does your sister have a mobility park where she lives at home?
She lives in Lawrence, so parking isn't too much of an issue there, and she walks a lot around her town anyway, so she doesn't have any parking problems in Lawrence.
So what I was thinking, Carolyn, it might be possible to get a temporary mobility pass for her if she's down here for a number of times for hospital treatment. It might be worth considering. It's not the answer to what you're asking us, but it may help her.
I don't know if you can get temporary mobility parking exemptions. I know when I get one, it's for 5 years and you had to pay about $60 now.
Carolyn, you can. I recently had an injury and I had one for 3 months.
And you get that from Disability Action? CCS Disability Action?
Contact me and I'll have a chat with you about it.
I don't know whether to contact you, but if you can let me know sometime, get Kat to let me know, that would be cool.
I'll contact you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? No, there's not. So look, thank you, Carolyn, for once again taking your time to provide some really valuable insights to the committee around some of the challenges that people in our community have. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so look, what I propose to do is to move 1 to 4 and then separately have if there's any discussion around agreeing or disagreeing around the policy changes and removing that provision of service and then the recommendation of council. So could I have someone move recommendations 1 to 4, receiving the report and the submissions, noting the 2 submitters we've just heard from, and note the summary of submissions. Thanks, Tom, and seconded Alex. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. So item 5, agrees or disagrees with the proposed change to remove the provision for the recognition service. Is there any discussion around that or questions? Got a move to move in the affirmative or the negative? Leslie?
Or move agrees.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. Any deliberations? No? All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. And then the recommendation to adopt the revised parking exemption policy. Are you
I'll recommend that.
wanting to speak before we...
Just here to answer any questions.
Okay. Do you have a question?
It's not a question, it's just that I was going to suggest, because of what's been said by many submitters, that perhaps there needs to be one small amendment to the policy so that it actually states in the bullet points does not apply to mobility parks unless the person also has a mobility parking. So the submissions we received said a lot about over 80s believing they could park in mobility parks, which we know is not the case. The policy doesn't explicitly say that, and I'm seriously wondering whether the policy does need to explicitly have an extra bullet.
Yeah, absolutely fine.
Yeah. So that'll be pointed out.
Yes, the report notes that we recommend improved communications, so I think that would be appropriate just to specify for clarity.
Any other questions?
So much a question, Chair, but just a bit of a korero around what the submitter, Chris, had suggested around parking exemptions for councillors when they're doing community engagement. We used to have a system where we had parking exemptions, it would have been about 6 years ago for councillors, but the community sense testing was that they were quite distressed by councillors using it for private use as well as consultation or consultative uses, so that was removed at that time.
Just following on from what Alex said, these were actually taken away from us because of the financial benefit thing. It was deemed as the
Fringe benefits tax. Yeah.
Correct. So it was declined, as even though you'd have to run a book saying I parked in Don Street for that reason and not to go to the Langlands for a weekend.
Yeah. Look, I suppose where I sit on it is, look, it's a nice thought, and thanks, Chris, for the thought. But it's probably one of those duties we just are normal citizens and we do it, and if there's a bit of a cost to it, it's good to do, in my view. I mean, I pay for parking for various places around town, and I'm a normal citizen. When I'm on council business, different here, I think that's reasonable, but the extension of those benefits too far, I think, just gets a bit harder to manage and can rub a bit deep with some members of the public. So that's where I sit on it. I think we've got a good setup now, but appreciate the thought, Chris. The only other question I had was just, and I think it's to what Caroline was alluding to around the friend that was 80 and had mobility but wasn't able to drive, and so for family members transporting them around, the transferability of that mobility pass, even though they're not the primary driver, that can still happen.
The issuing of an over 80s permit is currently linked to the fact that you've got a valid driver's licence, so that would need some consideration in terms of how the policy was worded. Yeah,
well, so the mobility passing is not transferable. Yeah, it has to be you that's driving the car, or the parking exemption.
So the mobility permits are issued by CCS to an individual.
Yep.
And that can be, my understanding is that can be moved from a vehicle to vehicle. You place it in the vehicle that you're either a driver or a passenger in, is my understanding.
Okay. Doesn't relate to our parking conditions. Doesn't relate to the over 80s.
Can't be changed.
Yeah, right. Okay. Nobby.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think what Caroline was raising was the issue of people that are plus 80 who subsequently can't drive, and whether a younger person who might be a caregiver or a family member could activate that pass. And I would put it to council that they shouldn't be able to, which is the current policy, that if a person is plus 80 and can't drive themselves, then they're open to total mobility.
Yeah, so it gets covered under a different scheme.
Yep.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, so for the recommendation to adopt the revised draft parking exemption policy with the changes agreed, including the suggestion from Leslie, thanks Leslie, seconded Trish. All those in favour?
Aye. Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay. Okay. We'll go to the minutes now, sorry. So the minutes of the infrastructure and projects meeting for the 1st of July. Is there any questions around those? The recommendations have already been through council.
Happy to move the minutes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Second it. Thanks, Alex. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay, so where we are now. Going to go to alternative water, item 12. Okay, thanks. Aaron Alistair, so really keen particularly to get quite a thorough explanation of the differences in the options so that we're really clear on what we're voting for, please.
The network to catch up. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Chair. So the paper that we're considering today is around the alternate water supply that we've been exploring at Awarua. We've already had a number of workshops around this topic and some quite extensive analysis that's been provided to us from the technical experts around everything from the quality of the water within the aquifer at Awarua, the regeneration capacity of the aquifer, and then more recently around some subsidence risks that are associated with the potential for areas around the aquifer to subside with long periods of significant volumes of water being abstracted from that site. That had then led us down a path where, as much as we had been looking to lodge a consent later this year, and although we did have money further out for construction in it, we wanted to be in a place to lodge the consent as early as possible so that if there was some reason, either via potentially private investment or money out of central government, etc., that we were ready and in a position to progress that supply as soon as possible. What we found, though, was that with that recent subsidence analysis, there was a question of our ability to retain a consent or to gain a consent when we apply, and whether or not we needed additional investigation to inform that consent, and also a question around whether or not council wanted to do any further feasibility around essentially Plan B or Plan C, given that perhaps the option wasn't as clear and simple as we had originally hoped. What we got was a reasonably clear steer from council that you wanted to keep this process moving. And so what we did, we went away and we had a look at the options. And what I might do is to say that option 2 is really the option that we workshopped around, saying that if we wanted to be able to get a consent really for more than 3 cubes a day, that we would need to have additional evidence to support that when we go to consent. An alternative option for us to allow the process to go faster has been developed under option 1. And what that does is it still proceeds with the idea of a evidence-based consent to be lodged in the first half of next year, when we've got a little bit further information around the subsidence effects. But also what it allows us to do is to get underway with developing the emergency supply essentially straight away, with the idea being that we would have sufficient bore capacity and to connect the infrastructure to the network, so that if any time in the next say 3 years while we're studying that supply in more depth, that we did have an emergency event that required really the choice between, do we need to evacuate the city or do we need to enliven that alternative water supply, that we would be in a position to do that. Now, we wouldn't be consented to take more than 3 cubes of water per day, but what we would do is we would invoke emergency provisions in that instance, which would allow us to take that 5 cubes per day, which would be the bare minimum essentially to keep the city functioning. We would want to continue, though, that progressive investigation over time, because ideally we would want to understand more about the aquifer and increase that consent limit over time, so that we may in the future get to a point where we have an alternative supply every day of the year to use to supplement our existing Arete supply of up to 20 cubes per day, or similarly that we could, if we did have an emergency event, really keep the city operating pretty much as it is. Whereas if we're down to 5 cubes a day, we're really very much on rations. We'd have no industry operating within the city, and we would be really on the bare bones of what we need for public sanitation around drinking water, sewage, bathing, etc. So that's how we've structured it at the moment. What I would note is that there's some pros and cons, obviously, around every option, as tends to be the case. The pros and cons around option 1 is obviously that we get underway faster. This is a project that's been going on and been being investigated for a long time, and we know that everybody's keen to get underway with it. So that's the advantage, is that option 1 could see us with the ability to draw an emergency supply should we require it from 1 July 2027, as well as to be able to obviously supplement some of our supply via negotiation with industry, which is something that we would look to do on a permanent basis of up to 3 cubes per day. The negative side of that, though, is that our money is currently sitting further out in the long-term plan, and what we would need to do is to bring that money forward. And if we were bringing the substantive amount of money of $18 million forward into the next financial year, that's obviously something that would have an impact on rates when we get to the annual plan deliberations. So that's something that we'd have to look at, either whether or not we offset rates in some other way, whether we reduced the program, or whether we accepted the fact that there would be a rates increase in those earlier years associated with bringing that program forward. Under option 2, we go slower. If we did have that emergency event, we would still be in that situation where beyond a few days we would be in a position to, in a really substantial catastrophic event, to have to evacuate the city. However, what it does allow is for us to understand the aquifer more, be able to get consent for larger volumes of water as we understand those environmental effects over time, and it means that we don't have to bring the money forward into those early years of the long-term plan. And then obviously option 3 is an and/or, and that's that option to whether or not we progress with feasibility for other options, either putting on hold the Awarua option while we understand the pros and cons and realistic feasibility of those other options, or it can also be an and option, that as we also progress that further investigation into the Awarua source, that we could also be doing the feasibility of the other ones, so that we could bring those all back to the table at one time and go, we really understand how to deliver this, we know the full costs, we know the full pros and cons, which option do we want to go with? So that's essentially the 3 options that we have before the committee today, and I'm happy to hand over to take any questions.
My first questions are just nice and easy ones. Have we had an event which has caused us to have to, or like a contamination event, which has caused us to have to draw on our current water reservoirs?
No, so what we have had is we've had obviously drought events where we've had to put in place water restrictions. We have had minor events where we have turned off the intake for a period of time, but nothing to the extent that's really put our reservoirs significantly at risk, and we do have that 2 days current storage within our city's reservoirs. So we absolutely acknowledge the fact that a full outage of the Ariti River source is obviously it's not a high probability. Really where this becomes high when it comes to risk is because of that catastrophic impact on the city if it does eventuate. And obviously with climate change, with more potential to have low water volumes within the Ariti catchment, it does become increasingly possible over time.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I've got the long-term plan in front of me, 2024 to 2034, and it shows you are correct, absolutely correct. The year 2030 to 31 is the budgeted larger drawdown of the money you were talking about. Unfortunately, though, what is missing in our long-term plan when you look at these major expenses is what is now, since in December last year, the $7 million for the Bluff wastewater upgrade got declined. What is the projected cost of that? Because I see that looming, even though we've got an interim consent, presumably underway for the Bluff wastewater. What is the projected cost? Because that's going to land somewhere around that area, and that is very important to know what that cost will be, because obviously wastewater, drinking water, emergency, which priorities? As you said, we've only got so much money in the budget, so what is the predicted cost for Bluff now that the new regulations are out?
Yeah. Through the chair, the answer is that we don't know at the moment. So obviously those new standards come with some potential ways that we could meet the standards. At the moment, based on how they are in draft, that would and how we're currently performing at the Bluff site, that would most likely require either nitrogen removal at the site or to extend the current pipeline out into the open ocean environment.
Within 10 million.
I don't,
no, it's
honestly
unfair
don't know
to
at the
ask
moment.
that question.
Okay.
I appreciate what you're trying to understand, Rennie, but
I guess, okay, I'll simplify it right down. Currently in the long-term plan is 7.7. So I assume that council in its wisdom, even though it was a divided vote back in December last year, I assume that the new cost will be less than 7.7?
So it's possible that with those new standards that we may have increasing costs to meet those, which we would also have to accommodate within the budget.
Hold on, we had
Over and above
the
the
option of 7.7, but we declined that.
I don't think that
Yeah, so-
I am able to make a comment on that.
Yeah. So, look, I think, appreciate your concern around the capital plan.
What I'm trying to get at is how can we look at the option with that bringing it forward, which is a practical option, but it's a lot of money, and if we've got other major things looming that we don't know about, which I struggle with because I thought we'd have the options by now, but obviously it's quite complicated. So I'm trying to get things, all the ducks in a row.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I bet it's about, well, you're never going to be absolute there, aren't you? And I think, some of the challenges we've had over the recent past is the changing legislation, which means we don't know where we're going to land, which means it doesn't know where the cost's going to be. So we're trying to plan as best we can. I think we've done a good job of that. It is a risk we have on the balance sheet. You point that out. That is absolutely right. In the context of our balance sheet, the timing of that, will just have to be managed. It's unfortunate, but if legislation sees that we have to pivot and spend more money, that's what we have to do. So, yeah.
Well, what I would say, though, is that that legislation is currently expected to land around late September, early October. So there would be an expectation that by the end of the year we would come back to council with the options available to meet that legislation and the cost associated with doing that, which would all be able to feed into the annual plan discussion. And council could potentially have the option to either confirm a decision potentially to pull the money forward for this project, or may, once it's seen that, decide not to pull that money
So the
forward.
LTP gets revisited 2024, 2027, every 3 years. That's right?
That's right,
Yeah,
2027.
so 27, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom and then Leslie.
So I think now that we understand the risk very clearly and the consequences of doing nothing, and now that we've got a solution in front of us, I think it would be negligent of us for it to push it back. So, I mean, I support the option 1 proposal, but I do have a question. So option 1 is phase 1, as it's described later in the project. I'm less supportive at this stage of phase 2 and phase 3. I may be later, but at this stage I'm not. So my question is there any of that $18 million in phase 1, option 1, which is pre-investment for phase 2? So in other words, does it presuppose approval for phase 2?
So what option 1 essentially does, and where the cost comes in, is it decides that instead of waiting until we have years of analysis of that subsidence risk, it decides that we're going to go ahead and construct the pipe network to connect the bores to our network essentially straight away, so that if we do have that emergency event, we can turn it on. The difference with option 2 is that we wouldn't make that decision to push the button on connecting to the network until we had that research further done and the ability to consent higher volumes of water from the take.
My question, again, Chair, if you don't mind. The phase 1 is an emergency, or option 1 is the emergency supply, which has been, supported by council up to this point. To provide that emergency supply, is all of that $22 million basically required, or is some of it pre-investment for phase 2?
No, it wouldn't be pre-investment for phase 2. Essentially, what this would provide is that bore capacity to get us to the 5 cubes a day, as well as a connection to the Bluff pipeline, which would be the first place that we could supply both to Bluff and back to the city, and some pump upgrades to provide that ability to bring water back to the reservoirs in the city. What would happen as part of stage 2 would be a new dedicated pipeline directly from the bores to the city, so that you could have that going all the time and wouldn't have that ability to try to manage water in two directions.
Pre-investment.
That's right, and new reservoirs would be stage 2 as well.
So if you want an emergency supply, it's going to cost us $22 million.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Access into the network and is usable under emergency situations. Okay, Leslie, and then Mayor Clark, and then ring again.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll start by saying that my definite preference would be option 2. I really can't see the advantage of option 1, and I do have a question about option 1 considering where we are in the cycle, and this is a question that's probably either for Mr. Morris or for the acting CEO to answer. Considering that option 1 makes such a difference in when we would draw down 18 million of capital, are we, this council today, able to even make that decision?
Decisions.
Exactly.
Covenant that applies now we're in election.
Because 18 million being drawn down in 26-27 instead of what the current long-term plan says is, in my mind, a very major decision.
Go to Trudy for that one. Trudy?
Kia ora, through you, Mr. Chair. So, under the Local Government Act, it's in terms of a moral or substantive decision that council did or didn't think it could make. So there's an obligation of deciding, making that judgment as a council. We can still operate, but it's understanding that it's very broad. There's nothing in the legislation that deliberately stops you, is that correct, Michael, from making a decision today? But it's understanding whether you believe you have the moral obligation to complete the decision or not. So it lies with the council, or in this case, the committee.
And can I just add to that in that what we haven't asked for is that confirmation of bringing the money forward at this stage. What we've said is that we would proceed on the basis of that being the preferred option, but it will need to be consulted on and to be dealt with as part of the annual plan. So that's where essentially that final decision to move the money would be made.
See, does that give you some comfort that, we're not breaching that sort of expectation around major decision?
No, Mr. Chair, it doesn't really give me any comfort, because basically if we decided on option 1 today, we are clearly signalling that we would be shifting $18 million worth of capital into 26-27. That to me is a very, very major difference to the current long-term plan scenario. And we would be a council at the 8 weeks away from the end of our term, setting in place for the incoming council a very major, I would say more than major, capital decision about our long-term plan. That would be, you could would say a millstone around the neck of the council that we are welcoming in October. So no, it doesn't particularly give me comfort. And having said that, I'll just go back to option 2 and say, of the many things that attract me to option 2 are that the option 2 option allows us to assess the early effects of pumping and the calibrate models to forecast the acceptable outcomes with greater confidence. That to me is very important. Through the workshops we have again and again heard technical information about the pumping, about the potential of, sorry, I may have the word wrong, collapse
that's right.
of the
so subsidence and that
subsidence.
impact on the wetland areas as well as impact on the aquifer itself from drawing seawater in are all risks associated with over-pumping before we understand effects.
And as Erin has just said, we are talking about a wetland area, and that for me signal of just how importantly we need to treat this matter and how careful we need to be about the effects of pumping and the effects on our environment. This is not an area that we can afford to play around with at an early stage without the maximum amount of information. I think this is an area where we need extreme caution to proceed. Yes, we want as quickly as possible to have an alternative water supply and an emergency supply. But in saying that, it has taken us a long time to get to this point. I really don't think that another 2.5 years of care to get the best outcome is asking a great deal more of council. We know that we have a very good prospect here, but we know that there needs to be some further careful investigation, and I would just urge us to think very carefully about the need for the further investigation. And on option 1, as I've already indicated, I'm really uncomfortable about us today making a major decision of that magnitude for the incoming council.
Just a couple of points on that, just so it's clear in everyone's mind. So the option 2 isn't stood up until 2030, whereas option 1 is 2027. So you've got that. That's the 2.5 years you're talking about, Leslie.
Yes, it is.
And then for my clarification, so option 1 is plugged in. So when the water's coming out of the ground, even in test phase, it's still plugged into the network. So we're not actually pouring that down the drain. We're actually using that water. Whereas option 2, we'd be testing but no use of water, right?
That's right, it wouldn't be connected back into the main network. Possibly there may be a use locally for it, but that's something we would need to explore.
Yeah, and then probably just so clear in everyone's mind, the feedback from Trudy is that, well, surmising here, Trudy, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been flagged, but it doesn't feel like it is a breach of those conditions that we are sitting under at the moment, although I appreciate your concern you've raised, Leslie. So.
Third comment now.
Yep.
My third comment is in relation to page 164 of our agenda, where there's an and or option 3. And I'd just like to say at this point, I just can't see the point of us investing any money in that particular option. I would prefer us to just be very clear about either option 1 or option 2. I've obviously said my preference is option 2, but option 3, I just can't see that at the present time what we would gain by spending 350,000 or perhaps more if there's an extra contingency on that.
Continue to investigate.
For an investigation into the viability of other shortlisted alternatives that we've had before us in the past and have pretty well discounted.
Thank you for that. Mayor Clark?
Erin, is the project in the fast track process?
The project has been listed on the fast track process, yes. So we have the option for either the fast track or the traditional consenting process through the RMA.
Getting a consent for this project doesn't mean that we actually have to undertake the work.
That's absolutely correct.
The other couple of issues for me is, have we considered developer contributions to this? So, for argument's sake, would aquaculture be approached or the transport hub in Arbour?
So whenever we are essentially approached by a party for water, that's something that we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that this is when we currently have our money scheduled, but that we want to get that consent. Traditionally, we've looked at getting that consent earlier rather than later, so that if there is a private party who wants to co-fund bringing that supply forward, that would be something that we'd be open to exploring.
And the last question relates not to the supply or the cost of the water, but to the security of the water. So putting aside the city's needs, which you've alluded to, that we have 3 days, I guess you've got developments pending in aquaculture, certainly around data grid, which is a data centre, and potentially around green hydrogen that all need copious amounts of water, but they need the security of the water as well. Big investors. So they're not going to put millions, if not billions, into project work if they can't secure a water supply. We're the only provincial city in the country that doesn't have an alternative water supply.
So I think there's two pieces to that one. At this stage, there's definitely been indications from council that it is eager to obviously look at economic development in the city, and there are ways that we can provide that security of water. And we've been approached by a number of parties, some of which are the ones that the Mayor has listed, where they have asked for significant volumes of water that we are not able to supply. And so therefore they've had to go and look at alternatives. In some instances that has, I guess, delayed their plans. In some instances, as I understand it, it has been a factor in the decision not to invest here. There are two ways that we could potentially address bringing more water into the network outside of that emergency supply, just for day-to-day use. And that's either through this option of investing in a source in the south of the city, or the other option is that we've still got capacity to take more from the Branksholme supply than we currently do, but that would require some development in terms of our piped network to be able to bring more large volumes of water, particularly to areas in the south of the city. So that was one of the reasons that we looked at that stage 2 on this project as being, if council did decide that it wanted to fund for economic expansion in the city, if you were going to provide more water to the south, it may be more prudent to do that via a southern supply versus piping more water from the north of the city.
Two other quick questions. So what we're considering here is increasing the supply of water. Have we looked, or should we look at the option of decreasing the current demand, which is a nice way of saying water meters?
Absolutely. So there is currently money in the long-term plan for water metering, and it's a project that the Project Management Office and our 3 Waters teams will be starting to scope up really in the coming 12 months to look at what a phased approach to water meters would look like.
Just to add on to Leslie's suggestions, do we have any urgency around making a decision today? If the decision was not made till January, February next year after the new council's there, is that a game changer?
No, that's not a game changer from our perspective at all.
Just one thing in my mind though, I mean, we've been through all the briefings and we've done a lot of work and we've had a lot of information through, so I think we need to take that into context as well for someone new coming in and getting up to speed with all these sorts of the variables of where we are today. It's not impossible, but it's a big ask and a really important decision for the city, so we need to balance those two things, I think, in today's decision. And can I just ask, for the remaining speakers, we're sort of narrowing down on which options we prefer, so if we can make sure our comments are linked to those. I'm interested in what you think the options is your preference. If you could stick to that, that'd be good. Thanks. Ringy?
Chair, my question's around getting consent. Is that option 2 is the one where we do a bit more investigation to prove that we're not going to interfere with the environment? Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. So Say this council for some reason chooses option 1, and you rock up to the consent hearing, and the chairman of the consent says, right, what's the environmental impact? And you sit there and go, oh, we don't know because we haven't done those tests. Well, how does that go in getting a consent if you haven't done those environmental impact tests? You won't get a consent, I assume.
So the advice, and Alistair may want to add to this after I speak to it, but you'll see there is a technical memo that's been provided by Harrison Grierson around the consenting pathway. So they are consent planners. And so what they've advised is that it's not that we're going in obviously with no study. As you've seen, there has been a significant amount of hydrology investigations and subsidence investigations, etc. But what we don't know is what is actually the effect of drawing those large volumes out, particularly for a sustained period of time, until we start to do it. And so that's where it's this recommendation around start small, take some out, monitor what happens to the environment and whether or not you start getting some small effects as a result of doing that, and then slowly increase over time. And so that would be the consenting strategy that we would take to the regional council. And the advice is that we expect from the consulting advice is that they expect that we would be in positive stead to gain that consent of that up to around that 3 cubes per day limit.
So you're saying that option 1 actually includes the environmental testing that option 2's doing?
So it would include that same amount at the time that we lodged the initial consent, but it would be going straight to larger volumes without having done that testing.
Okay, and do you see that as being responsible?
Hang on, just,
what I was going to say is
question
it's
for an
weighing,
officer, so
it is.
Okay, well,
can you
let
rephrase
me
it?
say that I believe it's not responsible to do that. I'll say it as an elected member.
You're allowed to say that?
Yeah.
That's fine. Probably the note there would be, when you're working in the natural environment, there's always a level of uncertainty in any project, and so those people who are hearing those consents who are very experienced would take that into consideration, where you can't be absolutely sure on the natural environment, but they would have a level, and it sounds like, Erin, you've had good engagement with them, which is what we'd expect, and the indication is that we've got sufficient information for them to be able to make a decision, albeit they will reserve that information.
And what I would also say is that this is a significant decision with different risk factors that all need to be weighed against one another.
Yes, true, thank you. Have Trish, then Alex, and Ria.
Thank you. I agree with Councillor Soper. I'm very concerned if this council, this committee at this stage make this decision, bringing that money so far forward. I know that we have done the work, as you said, Chair, but we could have workshops to make sure that councillors, new councillors or existing councillors could have as much information as possible. Tell me, if we chose option 2, is there a chance soon to go back to option 1? Are we committed once we go to option 2?
Your difficulty with option 2 is option 2 doesn't provide you the pipe network to actually connect water to the city. So if you do option 2 and then you had a significant event in that interim 3-year period, you would not be able to provide the city with water from that source.
So if we don't decide on option 1 at this stage, what is the option for us? Are we committed to option 2? And then say the committee comes back in next time and says, we really want to go down to option 1. Is that possible?
Once we're on the pathway of option 2, there is the ability to say that we want to fast track and go to option 1, but we would always be at around that 2-year mark from decision date to live supply.
Thank you. So that's the answer I really want to thanks. Thanks.
Alex?
Thank you, Chair. My preference at this point is most likely to be option 2, and it's really around the fact that the way that we've gone through the LTP process and spread what the affordability for the new water supply looks like over the next 10-year period, for us to shift it forward, you know, that's a pretty significant rates increase that you'd be looking at fast-tracked for our community in a time of need. And my other point is that my comfortability, is that the risk profile that we've been looking at is the exact same that we've been comfortable with right up to this point. So we've planned it, we've accepted it to this point, and I think we should continue down the track that we'd already pre-planned. I don't think that when we're looking at the and or for option 3, I don't think that we should continue to investigate additional options. If we get to the point where we go through option 2 and it appears that there is an extreme effect on the source, then that would be the appropriate time to look at option 3. And my last question really was about if we go for option 2, will that give us more time, I guess, to look at the developer contributions for some of the industry that the Mayor had indicated earlier, given that, you know, if we have that investment and we have those partnerships, that will be able to be used to offset the burden on the ratepayer, and that we don't have to afford all of the infrastructure ourselves.
Absolutely. The more time that we have before we push the go button is obviously more time that we have to be approached by other parties around wanting water sooner rather than later, and that ability to advise them that there is scope to pull that forward with a co-contribution.
Thanks, Alex. I've just got a few questions on that. So in terms of the developer contributions, so the discussions that we've had with various parties, they have indicated they potentially would contribute capital-wise. Definitely they'll be buying it, they'll be paying for the water when they use it, but they're actually... Well, there has been no indication from any private investor at this stage to contribute. So what we would look to most likely do would be is if they wanted to do it earlier rather than later, we would work with them around essentially them taking the lead on developing the supply, and then it would be built to council standards and handed over to council to operate. But essentially, most likely what would happen is that first stage of capital development would be fronted by an external developer. That's what tends to happen in higher growth areas, in the Selwyns and the Queenstowns, etc. It's not a model that's ever really tended to operate down here. We do have a limited number of examples where there has been a contribution between council and a private party around infrastructure, but it is very rare. And then the second, and it's probably a question for you. So I work out the rates impact is about 2%, because remembering it's capital, so it's the borrowing cost of that. So it would be in around that 2 to 3%. Is that, sorry to put you on the spot, but 18 million at our average borrowing cost, which is around 4.6.
What I would just say, in fairness, Chair, because this was an option that Council asked us to bring forward, I didn't ask the finance team to accelerate a rating impact on that, because I didn't think that was fair within the timing, which is why we'd said we would need to investigate that as part of the annual plan.
Stand down then. You don't have to answer that if you don't want to.
Well, there's a couple of comments that probably do need to be put in and probably should have been in the paper. Bringing it forward, as Erin has already said, we do move capital forward and backwards. We would be looking to offset if we brought 18 million forward and to rebalance the capital, so that would have an impact on the rates as well. But there's also a greater desire to potentially look at other funding methods rather than just straight borrowing.
Right, such as?
Regional Infrastructure Fund.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And those other ones where we have already been looking at applications anyway, but we could push much more harder.
Yeah, okay, but in concrete, is it? Ria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Previous councillors actually just asked a question, but I do have one. Erin, with option 1 that you've outlaid to us today, and obviously option 2, just so I get my head around this properly. You mentioned if we go with option 2, there is an issue with being able to pipe up to or get the water into the pipes. Can you explain more what you meant by that?
So
it's a network?
until you had done those first years of investigation, you would not construct the pipe to connect to the network. Which means that if you had an event in those early years, the water would be in the bore down at Awarua with no ability to get it to a tap.
And the other question is, do you know of any other council, when they have looked at alternative water supplies, that have gone through something similar to what we're going through now with bringing up option 1?
I'm not aware of that instance. However, I guess what I am aware of is that as soon as you're dealing with an underground supply, it is a long-term investigation process, often is the case. I've definitely been involved with them for smaller supplies, and they have taken a long time. But then on the converse to that, as I think has been well covered with the committee, we are one of the only cities of our size that is solely reliant on one supply.
Barry, and then Tom, and then Pania.
As far as option 1 goes, is what sort of testing's been done? Is it like with a bit large draw off, you're always going to have a risk of having contamination through it? Has that testing been done yet, or is it still in the pipeline?
So that's what we had the experts speak to at the workshop, and it's definitely not my technical expertise. But essentially what we have already done is we have looked at the quality of the water in terms of both its ability to provide water with low turbidity, water with low volumes of metals, those sorts of things in it, and we have got reasonably good quality water from that perspective, which means that we actually would be looking to have to treat the water to a lower level than we had perhaps initially anticipated. We've found that when we abstract volumes from it and we then measure what's happening across the aquifer in other areas, that the recharge is quite good. When we suck out a large volume, we see the water essentially come back into the aquifer in the way that we would expect. So that lessens that risk that over time, as we started drawing water out, we would find that the aquifer stopped recharging and we couldn't pull any more out. So the experts we've had the hydrology experts look at that, and they're reasonably confident in that. Where we've really hit the risk piece on this one is around this subsidence issue, and the fact that as we draw large volumes out, what we're seeing is a contraction of those upper levels of materials that sit in the ground above the aquifer, and that ability for those to essentially come back together and create depressions within the area, again closer to the bore, larger impact, further away, lesser impact, but that has the ability to both potentially change the ground levels and what happens in terms of not only stormwater flow off, but also the potential for seawater intrusion into the area and similarly into the actual aquifer itself. So a reasonable amount there, but again, what we're being told is that until we start actually drawing this water out in reasonable volumes and monitoring what is actually happening in reality, we've gone about as far as we probably can with modelling theoretically.
As far as option 1 again, have we talked to Open Country and the freezing works there with putting a test line in?
So we have had high-level conversations with some parties. We haven't gotten to all yet.
Okay, Tom and then Pania, and we'll just about draw it to a close. I think everyone's spoken then.
Yeah. So whether option 2 or option 1 is the correct decision, we'll probably know in 5 years' time. If there's an emergency between now and then option 2 would be a very, very bad decision. If nothing happens between now and then option 2 would be a very good decision. So it's like an insurance policy, actually. I mean, if we really want to save money and take risk, then we should insure anything. We should just go uninsured. Save a lot of money that way. I think the other thing that I would say is that it's a little bit of a misnomer to imagine that this is a new 18 million. It is not. It is $18 million brought forward. And it is, finance, as already suggested, we'd need to look at offsetting other projects to, to try to make that balance. It's not a new 18 million that would have an impact on rates. It's 18 million that would be brought forward by 3 years. So I still favour option 1, but, if in 5 years' time nothing happened, then, that would prove to be the wrong decision.
Last, Pania.
Yeah, I totally agree what you say, Tom, in regards like the option 1 does prioritise emergency supply and is constructed in a way that it pipes into the network, but the cost of that is horrific for ratepayers. Option 2 is where I'm swaying to, but really interested in what the cost difference would be around having a pipe ready to pipe into the network somewhere, not sure where, but and what that cost would look like.
As we've seen with the Branksholme project, we actually purchased that pipe really quite early for that project because of the fact that it was a post-COVID environment and we were really worried about being able to get it. So that pipe was sitting there ready to go before we even finished the design of that project. But as you will have seen, it's still taken us years to get the pipe in the ground. So it is actually that trenching and putting the pipe in that takes the time.
What would the on-top cost look like roughly for option 2 if we were to just include the pipe at a later date or a later time?
So that is in option 2, but it just sits further back out in 2029, I believe the timeline for that
on stream 2030.
Yeah. And essentially the costs don't change beyond inflation.
Okay, look, good discussion, and I'm pleased everyone apart from Ellen's had a word. Yeah, I know you've got lots of thoughts, so that's good. I think the key thing here is it is a risk to our community, and so we need to be very cognizant of that. In terms of the rephasing of capital, as we've heard from Patricia, that is something we do quite regularly, and it can be managed. And so, in my mind, the rates impact can be restricted to, a level which is bearable by the community. And the offset is they get a really important resource to them, and they'll only know that if an event happens. So, look, I hear the conversation around, making the decision, but I'm comfortable as chair, having listened to Trudy, that this is in our remit to make a decision today. And so what I'm going to do is just move through the recommendations in terms of, I'll do 1, 2 and 3 just in terms of receiving the reports. Firstly, so can I have a mover and a second to receive? Thank you, Leslie, seconded. Barry, all those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay, and then option 4. I'm going to move option 1 as chair, and I'll look for a seconder.
Seconded.
Thank you, Tom. So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour of option 1, I'll get a show of hands, please. And those against, just for the record, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7. So that's defeated. So then I'll need a mover for an alternative option. So Leslie, would you?
I will move option 2.
Okay. Seconder, Alex. Okay, and put that to the vote. All those in favour. Hopefully everyone remembers who put their hand up.
Same people.
That's good. You can't put 2 hands up, Reen, but nice try. Okay, so that, and against, is there anyone that wants to register their objection to option 2? Barry, you do? Okay, Barry's noted as an objection to that. Okay, that motion's passed, so it's option 2 we're proceeding with.
For complete, Chair, I'll move recommendation 5.
Yes, sorry.
Just a noting recommendation,
Yes.
but I think it's an important one.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Yeah, all those in favour of that?
Aye.
Against, carried. Okay. Thank you.
Quick note, did we need to move the and or for option 3?
No, because we've moved option 2.
Because we've just gone, okay.
Yeah. So look, hey, thank you for that discussion, and we've got a decision, so hopefully that's helpful for you.
So for you, Chair, isn't it, Alex, right? You've
Still an and or.
There's an and or there.
No,
Councillor, their motion was option 2 only.
Yeah.
If the motion was to be anything more than that, it needed to include the or at that stage.
My motion was clearly
Option 2, that's right, that's what I asked.
Yeah, so that fails, and the and or fails.
All sorted?
By as of right.
Okay, we do know what we're doing. Okay, item 6, total mobility. Thank you for the patience for those who have come to hear this paper. And also note Alison Broad joining us. Hi Alison, on Teams, so welcome. There's no submissions on this one. Okay. Welcome.
Kia ora, Chair. So I will, if it's okay, speak briefly to the engagement process and then pass to Alison Broad, who has been facilitating the process with the Total Mobility Committee, which she has done for many years, and she does have a other appointment that she needs to leave to shortly. So then Doug could follow up and talk about the policy recommendations. So you'll recall that the Infrastructure and Projects Committee has received advice around the programme and the costs that were being seen and some policy options that are available in order to look at that. And asked the team to go away and engage with the community, with the Total Mobility Committee specifically, around what are the options for this programme going forward. So just a reminder that the Total Mobility Programme has been operating for quite a number of years now within the southern region. The Invercargill City Council administers this for the district, and there is a total mobility policy that directs how that programme will operate. They have an engagement process which we have followed for this discussion. Alison has worked with both the Total Mobility Finance and Policy Committee that have some responsibilities around making recommendations to Council about how the programme can be sustainably run, as well as with the broader Total Mobility Committee. In addition to that, we have run a workshop that was open to all people with either total mobility card holders, operators, people with interest in the disability sector, including representative organisations, as well as a number of drop-in sessions. We've also had the ability for people to make submissions online or in person, which you can see are attached to this report today. So the Finance and Policy Committee had met and considered all of the engagement feedback, the written submissions, the feedback that had been received verbally through the drop-in sessions, and then worked together collaboratively to come up with the recommendations that they've put forward to you. So with your agreement, Chair, I'll pass to Alison to speak more about that process.
Yep, thank you. Welcome, Alison.
Kia ora, thank you very much. Just speaking briefly in support of what Rhiannon's just outlined. The policy, the Total Mobility Committee is comprised of consumers of total mobility, so that's card holders, assessment agencies, that's disability agencies, the councils of the Southland region, and some taxi operator or transport operator representatives. And that group has, for over 20 years now, been the group that considers issues relating to total mobility and meets annually. The Policy and Finance Committee, as Rhiannon says, does some of the, they've got some delegated responsibility to look at any issues challenging the sector, including budget management issues. Of course, they don't set the budget, that is a central government and local government preserve, but they speak for the sector on what their their guidance and preference is around budget management. And so in that regard, they have looked at the challenges relating to financial sustainability of the scheme in Southland and have given serious consideration to what the options are and what their preferences are. And so the recommendations that have come to the meeting today have been considered and endorsed by the Policy and Finance Committee, and then also debated and ratified by the full Total Mobility Committee. Of course, everybody wants, everyone recognises the importance of this scheme to vulnerable members in our community, and also the human rights issues and disability obligations that we all have. So it's any constraints in that context, and it's looking at just making sure that the use is impeded as little as possible to still live within the budget. So that's pretty much my comments at this point. But I'm happy to answer questions for the next 10 minutes. But then I have to go and do a submission to the QLDC. So sorry about that.
No, thanks. So I'll take questions directly if there is any for Alison firstly, and then wider on the paper. Is there any questions for Alison, particularly in her role as the chair of that committee? No, there's not.
Facilitator.
Sorry, facilitator. Yeah. Sorry. Giving you a promotion.
Thanks.
No, thanks for your work on that, Alison. It is, and I just want to note, it is a really important service in our community, this, and so appreciate the efforts you have put in. Leslie.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, before Alison does go, I do have one question that she might be able to help with. Alison, the reference to recommendation 3B is talking about the possibility of limiting the number of trips and for the 75% subsidy for 30 per month and then a 50% subsidy thereafter. The 50% subsidy is currently not what is offered. Was there any consideration that bringing into our deliberations any going back to a 50% subsidy was sending a signal that was perhaps unhelpful to users, considering where the current subsidy sits?
I take your point and I agree with it. To answer the question specifically, that was that being potentially opening the door to something that we don't really want to welcome in was not specifically discussed. It was more around minimising the impact, and so it was if the stretch the 75% subsidy as far as possible, but then and there was a debate around 30 trips or 40 trips, and there was a debate about whether there would then be a stepped subsidy after that, or whether it would just be a hard cap. So those options were explored, but the opening the door to something unwelcome was not specifically discussed.
So the reference to the 50% subsidy possibility was more of a concern that the whole scheme might be lost rather than let's return to a 50% subsidy.
Yes. Everyone would like the 75% subsidy to stay to the extent that it's affordable. It's the affordability is the issue of concern that the users, the transport operators, and everyone else in the sector is keen to find a solution to, so that the overall scheme is not put at risk.
I just want to check in, Alex, are your questions related to Alison or more broadly to the paper? Just so we'll make use of her time, given she's going to disappear in a minute.
Yep. More broadly to the paper.
You're not related to Alison particularly, Tom? Your question?
I'm not actually quite sure what the boundary limits are of Alison's work, but it is probably more about the the general paper.
Okay, look, okay, so we'll go back to Nobby, you were first, then Tom, then Alex.
Sure, I've got a series of questions. So how many users use the total mobility in Invercargill?
Excuse me.
I think, sorry, that's not an Alison question.
Well, you can answer if you know, Alison.
Through you, Chair, our last count was over 2,700.
2,700. Thank you.
Got a series of questions.
Yep. Expect that.
When you refer to the number of trips being taken, so if a person comes from home into town and goes back, is that one trip or is it 2 trips?
Through you, Chair, that's 2 trips.
2 trips, yep, fine. I recently wrote to the Minister, which is Chris Bishop, about the issue of total mobility and its pending cost implications both for central government and for local authorities. And I got a response about 2 weeks ago that said that NZTA was reviewing the whole total mobility scheme from a perspective that they were uncomfortable that clients were not paying their 25% share. So are we ahead of that review, or is that review being taken into account?
Through you, Chair, the review is running concurrently to this work. We're not sure of the outcome at this stage, but my experience of NZTA reviews is they take a considerable amount of time to get through. In terms of the 25% user charge, one of the recommendations in the paper is to amend the contracts, which we're right at the finish line for, so we have those contracts drafted with those changes already.
And I guess one of my reservations, Chair, is that we make a decision today only to find out that NZTA create a different environment for us. So I'll just leave that there. How's a person possibly able to use 225 trips in a single month? That's not a cheap shot. I just want to try and understand that.
Yeah, there are privacy issues with that. I can't really comment, to be fair. The system allows it to happen.
And that number's verified? Like that is actually a number, or it's not a misprint? It's not 100.
It's verifiable.
It's verified. Okay, thank you.
That's more than 7 trips a day.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Each day. On your paper on page 3 of your report, or 67 of board books, it talks about the 75% on the first bullet point, and then it goes on to talk about 50% and our share of that, and then 25%. So I just want to get a handle on who's paying what. I understood that the current 75% was 50% government and 25% council.
Through you, Chair, that's correct.
That's correct. Okay.
Additionally, the additional 25% is Ministry of Transport funding.
Okay. And the final question is whether we've factored in the cost recovery of the operators. Now, I've spoken to the largest operator in town, which is Cab I, or certainly one of the largest. She claims to be the largest. She states that she can operate her business on the subsidies, which is 75%, and doesn't need the client input. So that would be the question whether the cost recovery from our subsidy perspective is now too high. If we put the 25% back in from the clients, are they making a huge amount of profit on that? That's the first thing. When I asked her, why aren't you charging the 25%? And she just said, well, that's because nobody else is. And the moment we put the 25% on, if our competitors don't do that, then they'll get all the clients. So I guess it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, isn't it?
Through you, Chair, that'd be a fair comment.
Yep, thank you.
Hey, Alison, if you want to have to leave, then thank you very much for your work and for your time today.
Yeah, thank you. If I can just make one final comment,
Yes.
is that the minister, we started reviewing the local policy in 2019, and it was interrupted by the COVID pandemic, but it was also that's when the Ministry of Transport started reviewing it. So we've been waiting quite a long time to see what happens there, and that's so the interminable nature of it is ongoing.
Yeah.
And on that note, I'll say thank you and all the best.
Thank you. Okay, Tom.
So, I might misunderstand this, so as possible, but under recommendation 3, we are, the first choice basically is to reduce the number of trips, limit the number of trips to 30 per month, and then we say, and if required, return to a 50-50 subsidy. But when I look down at number 5, confirm the following approach, 5C says give notice to NZTA that council wishes to remove the additional 25% subsidy. Aren't those two things in conflict? Because above it we're saying and if required, and yet number 5 asks us to confirm an approach that says we are taking off the 25%.
Through you, Chair, when we say confirming their approach, these are the steps we're going to take. The last one there, each intervention needs to be implemented once we've examined the effect of the previous one. So they're essentially in order. So the first step we're going to take is to require charging. We will sit a moment for that, see what the impact of that is, and then we'll implement the other initiatives should we need them. The 50-50 subsidy share, moving back to that, would be a last resort.
I just wondered whether that needs to be reworded then, because I think the way it's worded at the moment, council would be confirming that we give notice to NZTA that council wishes to remove that subsidy. Whereas what you're saying, it's a stepped approach.
It's a stepped
approach. So if we could maybe reword it would clarify.
I was going to ask them to go through those recommendations and just explain how they work, Tom, so you've done that, thank you. Alex?
Thank you, Chair. I've had the fortune of being involved in a number of these consultation events and having a lot of conversations with our most vulnerable people in our community. It is one of those really tricky ones where you're really never going to capture everyone, as everybody has so many different unique needs. What we can do is try to find a happy medium or a compromise that still enables people to use it and utilise it as much as possible. My primary question, though, is that I fundamentally understand why we've arrived here and have heard from so many people, and I'm very thankful for that. But the reduction in going down to 50%, what I want to understand is that, you know, because the recommendation is that we retain 75, make sure limit it at 30 per month, but then if we have to, trigger the percentage to come down to 50%. My question is, what is that time frame in which we assess and then trigger to decide to go down to the 50% rather than retain the 75? Is it when we exhaust the fund and we go, you know, understanding that if we've got the technology to understand when the fund is exhausted, where is the trigger point that we would go through that sequence of events and point 5 that confirms the following approach, staged approach?
Through you, Chair, Councillor, we're looking at around 3 months to bed in anything that changes. Some of the smaller changes we could do progressively, but in terms of what we're talking about, I think a 3-month review would be more than adequate to assess the effectiveness of the change. What we're looking for is a change in the trend. So if the trend keeps climbing and the costs keep rising, we need to act upon that. So if we can reverse that trend, then it's been effective.
So what I'm trying to understand here, though, is that, you know, really limiting that accessibility for those that simply cannot go without it is really, that's really critical, right? So 3 months to me almost doesn't seem like a long enough period to actually assess what those trends look like, given that, you know, you need to educate. Well, we will need to educate quite substantially. The technology, we don't believe is there at this point, is it not? So, you know, it may even take you 3 months to implement said technology, at the very least, if it doesn't currently exist with the providers. I would like to see a longer review period so that we can actually understand and assess the trends in the data to make sure that we aren't just going to make it totally inaccessible for our community without actually giving it a substantial review period.
Through you, Chair, I share your concerns. I do. Time is of the essence for us. We have slightly less funding this year than we did last year because of the way the expenditure's gone. I can accept that if we did a 6-month review, we would see something tangible at that point. I'm loath to make it any longer for the pure reason that we could get 6 months into this program without any changes, and essentially the bucket will be empty. And that has a pretty severe impact on the user.
Leslie.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I've got a couple of questions. Page 67 says that the number of registered users has progressively increased from around 1,400 to 2,200, but Doug, you said it's now 2,700.
Yeah, that is a
Right.
typo.
So
Yeah.
from my understanding then, in 2 years, we've had almost a doubling of the number of registered users, because the 1,400 was taken at 2023, and you're now saying 2025 at this point we've got 2,700.
Sorry, through you, Chair, that's correct. A vast number of those users don't use it. Yeah, and
Okay.
one of the other things that was pointed out to me by one of my colleagues is that we often find out that people are no longer a member of the scheme because they've passed on. And so those cards aren't actually taken out of the system. So there is that issue for us as well to catch up with whether we actually have road cards sitting out there.
I understand all that, but the increase in 2 years, and we presume most of those people in the increase in the 2-year period are still active users. So the increase in the 2-year period has basically been 1,300.
Yeah, it's doubled.
Yeah, it's virtually doubled. Okay. Am I right in saying that is the 2-year period where the so-called understanding from many people that it was a free service arose?
Through you, Chair,
Coincides with the same period?
Yeah, it coincides with the additional top-up subsidy to make it to 75% plus operators not charging. It's essentially a free taxi service, and who's not going to take that up?
Now, Doug, can you just confirm for everybody, my understanding is that there are 7 local providers. 3 of them have chosen not to ask for the 25% user contribution. 4 of them are asking for the contribution, and my understanding is that those 4 have lost some numbers of users.
Through you, Chair, I can't be specific about the numbers. I think the 3 operators is right in terms of no charging. We have noticed a shifting of patronage, if you like, from some operators that charge to those that don't.
Okay. Having clarified those points, I'll just go back to the recommendations. I have a real concern with us introducing any reference to the 50% subsidy in our recommendations. I totally agree with the first recommendation, the A recommendation to amend the contracts with operators to ensure that the user pays part of the scheme is very clear and is applied. My understanding of the spirit of the scheme going back to the 1980s was that it was always seen as a partial contribution from the users, and that was part of the equity of the scheme, to bring equity for disabled people with the provision of the service, but to acknowledge that those who weren't disabled and had their own cars were paying for the car, the petrol, the registration, the car maintenance, etc., and that equity involved the users of total mobility paying some user component. That to me is my understanding of the spirit of the scheme, and that's continued through all that I have understood of the spirit of the scheme. It was always seen as a partial user pay, and in fact for some years was a 50% user pay?
Through you, Chair, for most of the scheme it's been 50%. It's only in recent times the additional top-up funding, and I think it was a function of COVID at the time.
That's my understanding, that it was brought in as an extra government payment at that time, but has continued and in fact was confirmed by Cabinet in the 2023 budget as a continuing 75% subsidy. So that brings me to my concern about reintroducing the 50% subsidy. This is a nationwide scheme. If we, Invercargill City Council, reintroduce reference to the 50% subsidy and therefore, in my mind, send a signal to government that they can alter the subsidy, that's a very unfortunate signal for this council to send about a nationwide scheme. While I am totally supportive of amending the contracts so that it is clear to all the providers that the 25% requirement is there, I'm very nervous about any reference to the 50% subsidy at all, because I think it works against the whole spirit of the scheme and the commitment confirmed by Cabinet in 2023. My other concern about the 3B recommendation, limiting the number of trips, is that the limiting of number of trips immediately calls into question whether there is a paternalistic attitude towards those in the disability community as to what trips are important to them. But the other thing that concerns me about that is that at the moment we don't have the technical ability in RideWise to do the limiting of trips. And my understanding is that that technical ability wouldn't be available for 12 months. Is that correct, Doug?
Through you, Chair, I know the problem is being worked on at the moment. They're working rapidly through it, but I don't have a time for that to be implemented.
The report here in front of us says it's likely to be a 12-month time span. Mr. Chair, what I would say about the limiting of the number of trips is that to a large extent it is an impractical matter for us to bring in today because the technical ability to bring that into force is not here. By the time the technical ability was a possibility, we would have a report back, if we pass it, on the effect of amending the contracts to make it clear to all the providers that the 25% user contribution must be charged, and we would then be able to look at the limits in quite a different frame. Just seems to me that passing a limit today is preempting, and certainly passing anything that has a reference to a 50% subsidy, I'm entirely opposed to. I just think that sends a very, very bad signal, and it's a misunderstanding of the spirit of the scheme.
Noting though, that's in contrary to what the facilitator, what Alison said around they had engaged with, and these are their recommendations around the 30 trips per month, and then obviously they've endorsed the go to 50-50 if it's sustainable. So
I heard that, Mr. Chair, but I also heard that there was a certain amount of fear from the community that if they didn't look at something like that, that the whole scheme might be in jeopardy. And I think we have to bear in mind that this whole scheme is not in jeopardy at this table. The understanding of the spirit of the scheme and why it is in place for our disabilities community is quite clear. We are not today talking about the scheme being at risk, but if there was a fear factor in the Finance and Policy Total Mobility Committee bringing us that recommendation for that reason, then I think we do have to take that into account. We could postpone looking at that recommendation for a 3 or 6 month period. But I'm really concerned at us today signalling to government that this council would lead any sort of turning the scheme back to a 50% subsidy.
Doug, can you give some views on that, please?
Through you, Chair. There is a body of work going on between TLAs, councils at the moment that use this scheme. All are heading down the same route that you've got in front of you from this report. It is a nationwide problem. We are not isolated in this. The situation is somewhat better in places, but vastly worse in others. The funding is a shared mechanism. It's mostly funded by the government. It's a 60% funding rate. So council comes up with 40% of it. And I think that the 50%, whilst unpalatable, I think, is a genuine option for us. But again, it's not our first option. It is an option we can address. So I agree, Councillor, that we impose the charging regime, reflect, and then move into other areas should we need to. This is a challenge on our budget, and I think we're obligated to move on it.
Wow, you haven't made us easy for us, Doug, in the way you've presented the recommendations, but we'll have a go at trying to get something. So look, I think what we've got to determine is the recommendations, and I do bear in mind what has been said by Alison as the facilitator and the engagement that's happened around this community, or this part of our community, and equally I acknowledge there'll be some that'll be unhappy with the decision we make today, so that's the nature of the decisions we make sometimes. So what we will do is we will move through the... So Doug, what you've talked about a stepped approach, so you'll try the 30 per month and 75, and then look to, if you need to, move to a 50-50. Redrafting the contracts. C 5C gives notice that NZTA that council wishes to remove the additional 25% subsidy reduction to 50%. So that's what you're meaning there is the top up we're making of the 25%. We'd remove that.
That's correct, Mr. Chair. If I could just assist a little bit here. On item 5 there, we're talking about first approach is to redraft the contracts, charging the 25% customer fee. The next step is to review that. And then it might be, if required, impose trip limits. And when we review that, if required, we give notice to NZTA. So each one of those steps has a trigger point for us once we review it. It's difficult to frame it, I guess, but I think that's the way we need to approach this.
Yeah. So you're going to make those changes, Michael? So it's important that if we came back to this decision, whatever decision we make, it's clear what guidance we've given to you in terms of, so that F makes sense to me.
Chair, could I suggest that it would also be helpful in that confirming the following approach if the D, developing a monthly communication, be brought up to become B? Because we definitely want that communication, and I would also suggest that that communication not only be with all card holders, but it specifically be noted that it's with assessment agencies.
So redrafting the contracts and communicating are the first two priorities we want to have in there.
The report makes it clear we don't have all the individual card holder details. The assessment agencies would therefore be a much needed stream for the monthly communications.
Can I perhaps just suggest to potentially simplify the resolutions, that for the most part, 5 just reconfirms those resolutions that have already been agreed further up. If we had the communications item as a standalone resolution, I think we could remove the need for the remainder of resolution 5 and simply stick with the resolutions that we have at the top around A, B, and we could also amend C to B, and if required, to return to the committee with a recommendation to do C at that time.
Cheers. Can I comment? All we've done under 1, 2 and 3 is note the report. We haven't actually approved anything in 1, 2 and 3. It's 5 where we're actually approving. So I think you do actually have to have 5. Chair, although I'm probably convinced by Leslie's argument, I wonder whether we need to include the number which has now been, is it D now? The reference to 50-50, because what we're saying is that we're going to, our preference is to limit the number. If that were not to work, then the alternative of coming down to 50% would be considered. I would suggest that would be considered at the time. I'm not sure whether it gains anything by including it in this particular resolution.
Should be considered before we make the decision to go to a 25% and limit the numbers.
Limit the numbers, and if that does not work, then a paper could come back again, with suggesting a 50-50. Because I mean, I take Councillor Soper's point that it's a little bit scary to include it in this, for some people, to include it in this resolution.
Okay, we're going to take a bit of a break for 5 minutes at the request of our administrative team, just to try and nut a clear and concise, and I think it is really important, as we've heard, it is a really important piece of our community. So let's just take that 5 minutes to adjourn, let the team reconstruct the recommendations so we can get some clarity around what we're actually approving. The amendments that we've, or the amendments were made to the recommendations, we receive the total mobility engagement outcomes report, note the submissions, note the recommendations from the Total Mobility Finance and Policy Committee and Total Mobility Committee, and the recommendations that they're making. So this is just for noting, right? 3A, 3B and 3C are for noting the recommendations they've made to us, to this committee, okay? And then request the newsletter to explore the options to communicate through a newsletter, and notes the progress in working to update contractual requirements. Keep coming down, Liz, please. Okay, and then we've amended things. So recommend to council, we amend the contracts with the operators to ensure all users pay and paid the required level of user contribution, which is 25% currently, and limit the number of trips to 30 per month at 75% and then 50% thereafter. And so that recording of that process is quite a manual process, but Doug tells us it can be done. It's just a manual process. It's not a technology solution that's currently available, though there is one being worked on. That's correct. Not by us, but by the industry. And then C is returning to 50-50 subsidies for all trips if all other options have been exhausted and as a last resort. So that's really talking to the financial sustainability of the report. So they are the recommendations. So what we'll do is we'll go through the first 5 and get a move in a second, and then we'll come to the next one.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. One note, number 4, we'll change request the chief executive, because it should be the chief executive doing that on behalf of council. It's not council.
Or just have it added that it's communicate through a newsletter to the assessment agencies and the users. So it's quite clear we want to capture...
You just put all relevant, all
some wording that captures all relevant parties.
Yeah.
In mind that some of the users can't potentially read the newsletter. Do we need to consider different types of accessible formats?
Yeah, true.
All methods of
I believe
communication.
a newsletter would cover all of those options. I believe that the chief executive and staff are well aware of the community we need to engage with in this area.
Okay, so we happy with that? Did you want to... Mayor Clark, did you have something to say?
Just when you get to 6.
Okay, righto. So can I have a mover and seconder for 1, 2, 3? Keep going up, Liz, please. A, B and C and D. C and 4 and 5, please. Noting that those are just the recommendations to this committee from the Total Mobility Committee. Trish and Barry, are we clear on what we're voting for? Okay, all those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Rangi, you noted? Yep. Righto, and so then we're looking for 6, recommend to council to adopt the following steps. So the operators all have to sign up to charging the 25% contribution, the trips being limited to 30 per month, and then under the 75% subsidy, and then to 50 thereafter. And then just go up, Liz, please. Returning to the 50-50 subsidy for all trips if all other options have been exhausted and as a last resort. So can I have a mover?
Well, there's a mover. I'm just going to say that I'd like to suggest an amendment to B and probably C.
Suggest that now.
So the limit on the number of trips I'm not a great fan of, but as a sequential matter, if that's what council decides, I do think in relation to what's on page 69 of our report, that we should be looking at the number of trips being 40 per month rather than 30 per month. And I'll just reference page 69, where it says that limiting the number of trips to 40 per month would impact 7% of our clients. Limiting to 30 per month would impact 12% of clients. I would think that we would want to impact as few clients as possible, and I'd certainly suggest that it should read 40 per month if there's going to be any question of a limit.
So Doug, I'll just come to you on that. So with those percentages, does that materially impact the financial viability of the scheme, that change?
Only through you, Chair.
Some impact, but is it material?
Through you, Chair, I would suggest it would be material because it's the high users that we're addressing with that clause. Vast majority, I think about 70% of people have what I would consider quite reasonable use. Low level, maybe 1 or 2 trips a week, up to maybe 5 a week. So there's a huge group that don't even reach those limits. So the impact is going to be minimal from a people point of view, but the financial impact would be felt.
Even with the 25% contribution?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, so bear in mind with that.
Just to emphasise there, I'm thinking of the users who fall into the category of having jobs where they are using total mobility for everyday travel to and from jobs, plus the possibility that they are also having to travel for such things as medical appointments, grocery shopping, etc. And I think the 40 limit, if we're going to say that there is a limit at all, that 40 is a more realistic acknowledgement of the life of the people we are talking about.
Hey, Tom.
Just comment that the recommendation from the Total Mobility and Policy Committee was 30.
It was, yeah.
And, in my view, we should test that first.
With them? Test that with them?
I mean, test that in terms of the level of support.
motion. Oh, right, yeah, that's what I was going to do, yeah. Okay, so can I have a mover and a seconder to move those?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, the other part, I was going to say
this is the last time.
For C, I was going to say, and if required, bring a report to the committee proposing, rather than specifically saying returning to a 50-50 subsidy for all trips, because I still have a real nervousness about the 50-50 subsidy before we need to say that. If that said, and if required, bring a report to the committee proposing other alternatives if all other options have been exhausted and as a last resort, which leaves it more open than just baldly saying the only thing that the report would come back on was a 50-50 subsidy.
Yeah, well, I suppose, though, if you read through that, it says if all other options have been exhausted. So you would address your concern by the fact that it says that they've explored the options and then they're recommending, having explored those and exhausted those options, that they go to a 50-50. So I'm comfortable it's covered in that wording.
I might be if it wasn't that this is partly a government. There is a possibility that in the intervening time we might have some declaration from government that changed our whole approach.
Yeah, well, that being the case, then we'd have to adopt, right? Okay, so can I get Nobby?
So, for those that don't know, when I approached the Minister, I raised 4 issues. One was the lack of the 25% client contribution. Secondly was the limit on the number of trips per month. So for argument's sake, a person that works 5 days a week and goes to and from ends up with 40 trips, regardless, as Leslie said, of any medical appointments, any social appointments, and any going to the supermarkets and the likes. So we will push those people into some significant costs if we get them down to 50-50. That's the first issue. The other issue is the technology is not up to scratch yet, and that's no reflection on council, it's just the way it is. And the final issue I raised was who can issue the cards, the total mobility cards. And is it really difficult for somebody, I'll pick on age concern for argument's sake, I'm not saying it's them, but using them as an example, is it really hard to say to an 80-year-old person or somebody that might meet the criteria, I don't think you should have a card for some reason? It's really hard when you're self-regulating. So I raised those 4 issues, and he said that they are concerns that have been raised beyond Invercargill, and the New Zealand Transport Association is looking at all of those issues. And they're not specific to Invercargill. I think we're jumping ahead of that, and we shouldn't. The only thing we should do today is recommend to Council, in my view, the 25% client contribution. Now, that will then trigger with central government if the majority of the trips at the moment are based on 75%, which means that the client's paying nothing, and the operators are happy with that. Then if the client is contributing 25%, why does the combined subsidy do 75%? Why isn't it 50 or 55%? Which is where we may drop down. And the other issue is when you have a 25% subsidy, and I've spoken to some clients about this, clients of Total Mobility, they say at the moment it's free. And they've said to me, I sometimes go out and use a taxi 4 or 5 times a day because it's free. If I have to pay $5 every time I go out, given that most trips average about $20, I'm not going to use 5 of them because $25 a day times 5 days a week eats too much into my benefit, be it independent, be it national super or being at invalid's benefit, either or. And so forcing the 25% does help regulate the number of costs. We've got the explosion, as Leslie quite rightly said. We got the explosion because during COVID we made it free and everybody just thought it's a free service, and we've maintained that ever since.
Hey, look, we've got the recommendation in front of us and I'm prepared to move them if I can get a seconder. I'm waiting heavily on the work that the committee has done, the mobility committee has done around this. They've had a wide engagement. There's been a robust process through this, and these are the recommendations they've put through to us based on representing all those needs that have been presented to them. So I'm prepared to move the recommendations if I can get a seconder.
Can I just make one comment in response to that? It's all very well to talk to a client group like you've suggested through a committee, but the bottom line is the ratepayers of this city are forecasted to pay an extra $500,000 potentially next year, just on this one issue. And so we haven't consulted with the wider community about whether there's a tolerance to go from, I think Doug's figures were about 1.5 million up to 2.2 million in the next year. And if that's the case, we should be talking to the wider community because the issue is the issue of free taxis as opposed to subsidised.
Yeah, but we're restricting those by the 30 a month in the subsidies under these recommendations.
Well, you'll create hardship for somebody that goes, as I said before, that goes to work 5 days a week, goes to the swimming pool for a bit of exercise a couple of times a week, goes to do the groceries and goes to a medical or a physio appointment. They will pay significantly more because they'll end up getting a whole chunk of that being 50-50. Now, for people on benefit, this is
Look, I appreciate your view, but we've got these recommendations. They've been through a wide consultation, and Doug, you've done the numbers around the financial sustainability of these recommendations, and you've indicated to us that you believe we should go with this approach, initial instance, and monitor the program to ensure we can have sustainability, and then continue to be informed about the decisions we make. And then to Leslie's point, central government may come in and change the rules in some way, shape or form down the track anyway.
Through you, Chair, that's correct. Central government may change things, but to be honest, I wouldn't hold your breath. It would happen within 12 months.
No, I know that. Yeah. They're not going to save us, but there could be a change. So look, I'm going to move them. Can I get a seconder for those?
Can we vote for these separately?
A, B and C, or are you putting them collectively?
What are the implications of that?
Implications are you might have support for A but not for B.
I know that. Thanks. But the implication is then you're not restricting the trips, so you're only going to a 25%.
But the alternative is that if
thanks. Doug, what's your thoughts?
Through you, Chair, the way this will work is that we have time to breathe in between each intervention. So we do the fare paying first. We look at that. Did that have the impact we thought? No, it didn't. Then we move to trip limits. Did that have the impact? Are we back to a balanced budget? We need to take careful steps here. I don't think if we individualise the recommendations as standalone, the whole thing doesn't really stand up. So I would do it in that manner, Mr. Chairman.
And so the recommendations as they're there are allowing you to do that stepped approach?
I believe so, yes.
You fair, okay, right. So yeah, I'm happy to take them all as one in a stepped approach.
Can be actually say if required then.
That was going to be my suggestion too, Chair, because at the moment as it stands, sorry,
Yeah,
don't
to
mind me,
better
it's-
reflect that.
Yeah.
So if required instead of and.
Reflect
Yeah,
the
that's a fair
intention.
change. And you've got and if required on the third one. Okay, seconder. Alan, thank you. Okay, all those in favour of the recommendations to council around the meeting of the contract, the limited trips, and then the third one, Liz, is the if required, after exhausting all the options and as the last resort, the returning of the 50-50 subsidy. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against?
Aye.
2, 3, 4 registered. You want those recorded?
Yes, thanks.
So did you get those?
Councillor Bond, Councillor Pottinger, Mayor Clark and Councillor Campbell were opposed.
Yep, that's right. Yeah. Okay. That's approved. Righto. Thank you. Proposed road names. Who's Patricia?
It's not fair to our community.
Okay, Patricia. If we can just pay attention, please.
I'll take the paper as read. It's there is the proposed name. There's no additional bits to
Alex.
add in from staff.
Okay, thank you for the paper. Any questions regarding the proposal? Barry.
I'm a bit concerned about...
Can you speak into your mic, please?
Sorry. Yeah, are these developers being pressured by iwi to front up with, with Te Reo names? It just disturbs me that they're putting all their investments into these developments, but then they are more or less forced to consider a Te Reo name for some, and I don't know why.
Through you,
Reason for
Chair.
that?
The application is in compliance with the policy. They provided 3 names, one of which was Te Reo, and they had worked with Waihopai, and they selected which was their preferred, which was, in this case, Kamahi.
Mahi Place.
The process we asked.
It's set out in our policy.
That's
Chair.
right. Was followed and this is what's come forward. So, yeah. Any other comments or questions?
I'll move the recommendations.
Thank you, Trish.
Second the recommendation.
Thanks, Leslie. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay, thanks, Patricia. Doug again. Wagner Place share facilities.
But I voted against that.
You want your vote recorded? Yeah.
You've recorded.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kia ora. This report is about alternatives to the Wagner Place shower facilities that are tagged to be closed. I conducted a number of visits and meetings with stakeholders around the around the town, including Invercargill Central Limited. Their operation doesn't allow for having folk come in to use their facilities. It was a business decision. It just doesn't align with what they're about. The Salvation Army, they do look after quite a few transitional and homeless folk in their duties. They don't have the ability to do anything in this space. They really don't have the funding or the space. So other than temporary housing, they can't offer anything in a permanent facility. They did have discussions utilising Anytime Fitness. They were reasonably open to having their showers available at a cost. I think the cost was only about $5 or something. You can go in and you have a shower and so on. Now, YMCA South also the same thing. Their concern was about having a large number of vulnerable youth there who are doing an alternative education pathway, and they didn't feel it would be appropriate to have those young people mixing. And Orange Sky. And Orange Sky is a nationwide charity who has a travelling sort of van bus that has shower and laundry facilities and so on in it. We did have discussions with them. They are a charity. They rely on volunteers, and the volunteer sector is becoming very, very difficult to find volunteers in. And also the upfront cost is quite considerable. To fit out a new van is around $300,000 to their specifications, and they only have one specification for their van, so it's a branding issue as well. Now, I think Orange Sky is a workable option, but we would need to look at long-term funding, and I think that funding could come from all manner of places, but I think there's corporate funding is being used for corporate sponsorship, some trust funding as well in the North Island. It's a difficult program to get off the ground, but once it's running, it's apparently very popular. So at this stage, I've also provided you with a cost for council putting in a facility, a shared shower and toilet facility from Exelou, the ones we use for our toilet system at the moment. Roughly $300,000 plus installation. This will be unfunded. So what I'm asking you for is, I've given you some options there. Fund a new toilet, a new system, or we can go and develop some partnership models with social services and see what we can do in that space. Happy to answer questions.
Doug, just before we start, so what government agency does this sector of the community fall under? Is it MSD?
It's MSD, yeah.
And have we approached them about the taxpayer funding this, given it's a...
Yeah, not directly, no, but I've been working with the agencies and they've made it very clear there's no additional funding. They put their funding through these groups the funding's very tagged for what it can and can't be used for, and capital is not really amongst their places, so they're about provision of service.
So this is another example of central government imposing cost on our community.
I couldn't comment, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Chair. This afternoon I spoke with the owner of the, I guess it's the old railway station, sits 11th Street there. It's got the pig station attached, all that. And I mentioned our dilemma with removing the showers and toilets from Wagner Place, and would he be interested in providing either their building to install it or an add-on or whatever. And he is very agreeable to talk to council. The location is good. It's in the vicinity that they used to be in. And we've got a budget there. I think the budget could be increased if council's in the mind of spending $1.98 million on a clock tower, then I'm sure it should be looking at a few more dollars for providing the facility that our public needs. So is that something you could do, is talk to the owner of that establishment is in town tomorrow, but I can certainly give you his details.
Through you, Chair, Councillor, absolutely very keen to talk.
Yep. Thanks, Ringy. Trish?
So, Doug, I've got a few questions for you. Sorry. First of all, from my memory and my rereading of the documentation, our reason to close or consider closing Wagner Place was because of the cost of running it. It's one of the things, and that was because it was we needed 2 people to be rostered and the various costs. Is there any way, when I look at this cost, is there any way we can use the existing facilities minimised? Either perhaps just the morning, or where perhaps it didn't need to be so monitored, or even, I presume by this, you're just going to have this available, so what you've got here. So couldn't we do that within the existing facility that we've got?
Through you, Chair, anything's possible, Councillor, to be fair. That would require some significant redesign and quite a large upfront capital cost to redesign it to be unmanned and open to the public, yeah.
So would that be comparable to the cost you've proposed? Do you know? Would you have any idea?
Oh, in an existing structure, I think it would far exceed a port. I believe so, yes.
But then we've also then, if we do that, we have to do something about what is there now. We can't just leave it sitting empty.
Through you, Chair, the Wapna Place facility.
Yes, Wapna Place.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is that instead of having another empty space, another piece of infrastructure that's sitting there, not used, and we've done something somewhere else, surely to be more effective as a community, would be better to look at that and see what modifications or changes or whatever design we could do to use the existing space, or use it for a limited time.
Through you, Chair, that is an option, yeah.
Yep, thanks.
So Doug, just on that, why was that not presented as an option?
Please.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this item when it first went up was around ways that we could achieve savings through the annual plan process, and so that was the reason that it came up in the first place, was because as spoken to, the costs associated with maintaining that facility are high, and similarly with renewing the facility, because it is an old facility, so therefore the capital costs that we have to invest are high also. What the staff were really asked to do was to see whether there was an existing facility that could offer those services that was an alternative to maintaining the Wapna Place facility, and so that's primarily what's been explored, and a number of those were options that were put forward by the committee at the time, or I think by council, at the time, as well as some additional ones that the team have explored also. What Doug has also added on is the potential for a facility that's essentially purpose-built for this, and something that we can put in a place that is perhaps a little bit better suited to the task, as opposed to the current CBD location, if we're specifically looking to try to target people who are rough sleeping. And so that was the reason that additional option was put forward. It's something that we could locate closer to, again, in consultation with our social services community, locate closer to the need.
May I have a subsequent question, please? But then that still leaves us with Wapna Place empty. The toilet's empty, doesn't it?
Yeah, through yourself, the Chair, that absolutely would leave it empty, but Council is still left with some decisions to make around the future of the other half of Wapna Place that's not been developed through the work that's currently underway there, and that's something that we would need to look at as part of that work.
Thank you very much.
Then Leslie, then Alex.
So I'm probably echoing what Trish has just said, but at the moment we have Wapna Place maintain existing Wapna Place service, which I'm assuming option 4 means the same service, which is 7 days a week, I think 12 hours a day, 84 hours a week. In reality, we could cut that back to 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, for example, 20 hours, which is a quarter of what it is now. If it was a quarter of the charge, since all of the costs are wage costs, as I understand it, a quarter of the charge would be $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 or something like that. A massive saving compared to what we are paying now, and it would still allow people to, share in the morning, and there's a little bit of, I think, social mixing in there in the morning too. Using the existing facility, at reduced hours, substantially reduced hours, to me is an absolutely logical conclusion here. I mean, it seems impossible to imagine we would actually buy something for $300,000 in a truck or something. I mean, it just beggars imagination that would be a preferred option. So, I mean, you know, I would support option 4, but it would be at a very much reduced number of hours.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, can I just clarify, Chair, that the more than half the costs, and Heather is at the back of the room and be able to indicate this for me, but more than half the costs were in the actual maintenance of the facility versus the operational costs of servicing. So whilst we reduce the hours, we'll reduce that servicing portion of the cost, but that was, as I recall, less than 50% of the cost.
Sorry for your Chair, but you're saying that all of the maintenance costs is fixed, none of it's variable?
So essentially what we have is a facility that hasn't been invested well in and is now old and really reaching beyond its life, which means that it is costing a significant amount in terms of maintenance and renewal.
I think I would like to see what's variable and what's fixed. I'd be very surprised if it's costing us that much money and fixed cost it could not be reduced if we reduce the number of hours of opening. But anyway, Chair.
Thank you. Leslie?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So, my memory of our discussion on the annual plan was that we agreed to close the Wapna Place toilets on the proviso that an alternative shower facility was found. So we were never talking about another toileting facility being found. We were talking about the shower facility because that was the only thing missing. Yeah. We had many discussions around the table about the fact that there were now extra toileting facilities in Invercargill. They were, in many cases, quite close to Wapna Place. We had ample provision of toilets. We were talking about shower facility. Wapna Place has one shower. One shower. As the Deputy Mayor has just said, it would seem ridiculous to be talking about this council having had a long discussion at the annual plan time about reducing a 200,000 yearly cost for the operation of the whole Wapna Place facility, to then decide to spend nearly 400,000 on a new installation of shower and toilet, which is not something we required, when actually Councillor Pottinger has come up with another alternative possibility, and the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Boyle have also indicated that Wapna Place is still available. Wapna Place could be quite simply used for its one shower facility. In fact, that shower facility is a family room. It has a toilet, a shower. It can be, the rest of the building could effectively be closed off, and the only thing available be that family room with its shower and toilet. I would also suggest something that hasn't been explored and could be, is that there is a backpacker accommodation next door who might actually be interested in helping on a short-term basis, if not a long-term basis, with the operation of that facility while council explores others. As my memory of our decision was that if an alternative wasn't found by August, we were leaving Wapna Place open. Therefore, I would also suggest, along with what Councillor Pottinger has brought to the table, that we explore the other possibility that the next door backpacker operator might actually be interested, short term, if not longer term, in operating a reduced service using the one facility at Wapna Place, possibly a key issue arrangement that could be part of the discussion. But if that hasn't been explored, that's also another option. But it's just ridiculous to talk about us having saved $200,000 a year and then suggest that an alternative would be to spend nearly 400,000.
Thank you, Chair. My take on it is that the best outcome would be being able to partner with some sort of, well, potential provider or social services provider that can also help provide intervention or assistance or wraparound services that, you know, like at some point in the journey of a rough sleeper, they're going to require some help. So I think that's the best social outcome for it. Totally take the point in that if we've already got the facility available at a reduced rate, then that's also a viable option. What I haven't seen in the report, though, is that we had the discussion about when this initial conversation was on the table, was the use or the retrofitting of existing council infrastructure. So the accessibility or the concession card to be able to access a family room or one of the family rooms at the swimming pool, because it's already supervised, you've already got cameras in place, you've already got security in place. Similarly, we've already got quite a substantial library there. There is a family room at the back end of it with toileting facilities. Is it possible to get a shower in there as well? We've already got security and staff, etc. Like there's a variety of possibilities there that I think should be explored. So yeah, that's the logic that I'm sort of seeing in it, and that there should be some options out there that aren't a brand new $300,000 Exelou.
Sorry, I just apologise. I think perhaps there may have been something that happened in the final edit because there was some wording in just around work with Splash Palace with the swimming pool. So apologies, that was something that was closed out and it wasn't an option that the team saw that we were able to take forward. So that was absolutely explored.
What's the background of that?
Do you have the reasoning for that, or is that just...
Through you, Chair. Discussions were held with the pool staff, and there was a significant concern about security of non-members coming in. There is a charging option to use the showers that we did discuss as well, but generally it was seen as difficult to control the type of demographics that they have coming in, particularly concerned with children and youth.
Ask a supplementary question to that. So there was already a nominal charge to use the Wagner Place facility as it is. So it's not like we would be, you know, we wouldn't be charging anything super substantially differently than what's currently occurring there. Like anybody has a right to go and use our Splash Palace facility right now. So I don't understand what the difference is.
My understanding of it was that, and I can refer to Mr. Capel if he wants to provide any further context, but my understanding was that there were concerns that directing other patrons who weren't pool users to the pool facility, being a venue where you had, you know, youth using the changing rooms, etc., wasn't something that it was felt that the community would be supportive of. Is that fair?
Nobby?
Not quite what I was.
It's a bit disappointing, really.
Are we?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of issues. If we cut the 200,000 for Wagner Place down to restricted hours, and the suggestion there before was 50 to 60,000 Ks to make savings, and we have 12 clients per month having a shower, that works out at a nice tidy sum of $400 per shower. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to work that just doesn't work. I think we've got a couple of options there. For these people, it needs to be free. The moment you start talking about having a shower that might cost $4 or $5 at Splash Palace, you'll be up against these rough sleepers who can, for $7, go and sleep in the old Grand Hotel and have a shower as well. So these rough sleepers are either there by choice or they're there through financial situations where they just don't have that money. So I think we've got a couple of options, both managed by library staff or library management. One is the suggestion that's already been put that we close off large parts of the current structure and just allow access into the showers, and that somebody from the library would open it up, say at 9 o'clock in the morning, and close it again at 11, Monday to Friday, or Monday to Sunday if you thought it was appropriate. That stops people actually sleeping in the structure, so they can only go there for a shower, and it's free. The other alternative is to convert, as I think Alex said, one of the facilities in the museum itself, because some of the rough sleepers that we have actually go into the library anyway because they get access to free computers. And so I know that. So a couple of options there that don't cost the client.
Yeah. Okay. So look.
Into the library.
I think you mean
So
library,
what I'm,
not the new.
So what?
Library.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is have a go at doing the recommendations myself. So changing the options to explore the option at the railway station, as Ringy suggested, or other providers, including council facilities in the area. So I think we've talked to the library, and Leslie's referenced the backpackers, I think. So Doug, if we could change that. And then the other one is to maintain the existing share facility with reduced airs. We want to see that back to the committee around what is the actual cost of that provision, having that walk to place facility on reduced airs, what are the implications cost-wise, obviously for ratepayers, but equally in functionality for user groups. So.
Sorry, Chair, to just note that the reason that this was coming back to this meeting was because the current lease was due to be renewed. So any of those options where we want to essentially take more time would require, I think, a resolution from Council to enter into at least a short-term lease on the existing provisions, whilst we come up with an alternative to come back to the committee with.
So when does that lease expire?
The end of this month.
End of August?
Late August, I think it was, 20-something of August. I'd need to confirm the date.
Is there any provision in the contract to do it on a monthly basis? So you could roll it on a month? Okay, so I think, but I'm happy to take feedback from the committee that, you know, we want to get a good solution here in a timely manner. We've got some good suggestions made from the committee, so I think if we even had to extend that lease by 1 month out to the end of September, if that gave us sufficient time to explore what's been suggested here, I think that's the best way for us to proceed. Is there any...
I think I would probably move it longer than that. I don't think realistically a month is going to be...
Well, but it's a month by month, so we can, the staff can work out how long they'll need, and then they can do a month by month process.
Difficult to get, you know, staff and so forth. I mean, I think I would move that, get 3 months, you know. I don't think it's going to happen within a month.
Doug?
I'm probably just going to take some guidance from Michael Morris, just regarding the first infrastructure and projects likely meeting post the election period. We may actually have to go to 4 months to make a decision, and then at least give some sufficient notice to the lessee around that.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Of course, an Infrastructure and Projects Committee will be dependent on what the decisions of the incoming Mayor and Council. Of course, it is likely staff recommendation would be that there be an Infrastructure Projects Equivalent Committee. There is a committee meeting scheduled in the current planning in about the 3rd week of November to be the first of the committee meetings to be conducted for the new council, but of course that is subject to decisions to be made in late October, early November. The inaugural meeting, just so everybody knows, is scheduled currently for the 4th of November.
Okay, so excuse me, Chair.
It would be 4 then, wouldn't it?
For every month we extend the contract, it's costing us. So if it's 200,000 for a year, then every month is going to be additional to what we had originally planned. So we need to consider that as well.
Ray?
Just following on from Mr. Morris's comments about the meeting, in the new electoral term, it will depend on the delegations of the committees too, because at the moment, any of our standing committees can make a recommendation, but they are nothing until endorsed by council.
Yeah, that's right.
So it may be that in the new term, the committees like infrastructure will have delegated authorities like they used to in the past. So, yeah, That's just it.
All things are possible.
Everything's possible.
Leslie?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Every month of an extension at the current terms of opening hours would be roughly $16,500. It seems to me that's not at all what Council was talking about. I could understand a temporary arrangement with the current contract holder for reduced hours. I can't understand why we would have a temporary arrangement with the current holder for exactly the same hours that are currently operated. That would, to me, be a ridiculous position. It would only, in my mind, be acceptable to have that sort of short-term arrangement if we were talking about a much reduced number of hours. And if we're talking about, and the report mentions tourists and homeless, then we're probably talking about 8 till 10 o'clock each day, a couple of hours a day. But the current hours would just be unacceptable and actually counter to what we talked about through the annual plan. So I just put that in there, that with the current contract at 200,000, as we all know.
So Heather, what within the contract, you may not know, is there an opportunity for not only reduce, to go month by month, but equally to reduce?
There would definitely be a negotiation contract. Depending on the reduction of pairs, they may not be in a position to do so.
So I'll just repeat that for the live stream, that it was just noted that that would be a negotiation with the contractor and subject to agreement with them.
But we cannot be too prescriptive. I mean, because it is going to be the subject to a negotiation, and it has to be something that the contractor's prepared to take on, and they may not be prepared to take on 2 hours a day. So I think it should read something like encouraging staff to negotiate, a much reduced number of hours, rather than be prescriptive about the number.
But I think we also have to be fair to those people who are employed to provide that service as well. Absolutely.
So hence they would ask staff to come back around maintaining the existing share facility on reduced hours and the viability of that, which was what I put in the... Wow, we've got some goodies today.
Just an extra room to the library.
Yeah, exactly. I look forward to it. Oh, handy. Oh, right. There are plenty of pockets.
So probably we need an extension of the existing.
Mr. Chair, the other thing to note is that there is a current charge for anybody who uses that Wapna Place shower. It's not free. Never has been free.
Right. Mm. So these the capture of the recommendation to council, so, and thanks for your patience, that the staff work directly and formally with potential partners, so that's the capture Councillor Pottinger's suggestion for provision of facilities suitable for, and Councillor Soper's, tourists and homeless, and that staff explore the option of maintaining the current facility at Wagner Place with reduced as and enter into a negotiation with the current contract holder. I'm prepared to move that. Can I get a seconder? Thanks, Trish. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Whew.
Mr Chair, will we be able to have a report at the next meeting on that
Yep,
issue?
Doug's given me the guarantee you'll do that.
Through you, Chair, yes I have.
So the Three Waters Renewal Program, tab 9, update report. Who's presenting? You're doing this from here?
So yes, I'll be doing this from here.
Okay.
And thank you, Chair. Just in the interests of time and the fact that we've still got some chunky items to deal with, I'm just going to take this report as read, and I'm happy if there's any particular pressing questions.
Questions from anyone?
It's rare that I can get in ahead of Leslie on a spelling mistake, but at the top bullet point on the second page, financial's not spelt correctly.
And I wasn't going to mention it.
I'm sure you weren't.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. We'll amend that for future reports.
I know you put it in there as a test.
No questions? Okay, so the recommendations are we receive the Three Waters Renewal Update Report and the Engineering Services Program Dashboard attached, and note the current status of the project. Can I have a mover, please? Ria, thank you, and Pania. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Your time.
Sorry.
Aren't we 10? Infrastructure PMO capital projects. Oh, this is you first, yeah, sorry.
And we're going to, I was planning to take the same approach with this report as well. It obviously provides the progress of the infrastructure works being done under the Infrastructure Project Management Office. That program and progress against it is provided in the attached dashboard, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Alex.
Just wanted to quickly question why, when we're looking at the Wagner Place toilets closure, at the fact that we've got changing room renewals project there and a concept design being issued, why potentially that hadn't been considered to have a single accessible shower incorporated into that design, potentially with visibility line to the reception.
Thank you, Chair. The work that we undertake, this is a project that's been in the long-term plan and in the pipeline for some time, with, as I understand it, the design already underway before we got to having discussions about potentially moving the Wagner Place facility. So at the moment, that is not something that would be within the scope of that project.
Can we not amend the scope to allow for it on a council decision? Because, the piece that I'm really struggling with here is that we've already got the existing infrastructure, we've got the existing security. It's diverting some. I don't like the idea of demonising, people out of using council facilities that we, have in existence. So why we haven't explored it more is a little bit baffling to me.
Question that we've asked and we've been provided the answer. I'm probably not the person who can provide any further context around that.
Rex, do you have any comment there? No.
So sorry, I'm not sure what the answer is then.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna.
There is no answer.
So this is a project that's been put on the scope, well, the project management, and it's been managed by the PMO.
That's right.
Okay. and I had a question related to that, not specifically the same thing, but in terms of, that seems a reasonably small project, not trying to move away from your question. And equally, there's a couple of other projects that are relatively small in terms of capital number, and yet we've got some other projects like the Bluff Bike Park and the Surrey Park upgrade that haven't been in this program. So has there been a change to what comes into this program?
The Surrey Park project is in a project that's delivered by the Project Management Office. And sorry, what was the other one?
And the bike park at Bluff, when we did that wasn't, so that was delivered by Park, so that's why it wasn't in here.
That's correct. This is only the program delivered by the Infrastructure Project Management Office.
Okay, so how does that, how does it end up with PMO versus stay within operations?
So there was a program put up at the time the long-term plan was agreed of all of the capital projects, and it was agreed at the ELT which projects would be delivered via this stream and which ones wouldn't. That being said, at the time, the majority of the larger projects around the likes of Mersey Street, the wastewater treatment plants, etc., were all projects that were infrastructure projects, and therefore the decision was that the infrastructure project, that we would be rebranded as an infrastructure PMO during this long-term plan, with those only delivering projects for the infrastructure team, with the exception of these ones that are property projects being delivered on behalf of the property element of infrastructure, for the ultimate client being the services that use them.
So looping back, and this is probably where we get your question better under explored, Alex, is so when that comes through ELT, because I think that's what you indicated, Erin, if there's another project like the where do we provide shares in the city for, a community, does that get considered when it comes to the ELT program in terms of, should we sort of pause, not put this in the program until we've addressed these issues? What's the process around that to avoid perhaps what Alex is flagging?
I think the key piece that I'd note is that there has been a change from this being a organisational-wide project management office to only dealing with the infrastructure projects. So I might defer to Trudy as the acting chief executive just around how we deal with the broader program.
Yeah, just Alex, do you want to?
Just a clarification is that I'm not suggesting that we direct everybody into the family changing rooms or the individual changing rooms with everything. I think that when we're considering a different layout, then the infrastructure could be built to have a private, private area to be able to facilitate what it is that we're trying to get for a community outcome. So, yeah.
Ready.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I think if we just take for a moment a step back and acknowledge Councillor Crickett's identification of opportunity, is that what we've understood from our previous report is there's some more further work to do in the engagement space and the needs analysis for how we resolve this longer term to achieve the outcome that Council wants and the community want. So I would recommend that I see Councillor Crickett how you can make that connection, but it would be remiss of us as staff to not give advice about understanding the needs of those in that situation and making sure that we understand where they want to be and how they want to live, as much as just saying you can only go here. So absolutely hear what you're saying, and my understanding of the project is it's in that final design, and this has been waiting for some time to be achieved to improve the flow of what's occurring at the aquatic centre. So I hear what you're saying, but I think we need to do some further work ourselves as staff and present back to the committee with the appropriate outcomes. I realise that's not the answer you're probably wanting.
Yeah, it's acknowledging though that particularly too there is a very unique need around this section of the community we've talked about previously in the previous paper, and so but equally I take Alex's point that it's probably more to when we've got these things on our agenda, are they being considered? So it's probably for noting more than anything else.
Yes, I think there's some mahi we can do in that space about how we have a joined-up conversation about all of the works that are planned and understanding other strategic issues that council has as well.
But equally acknowledge what the staff's taken into consideration, or the ELT. Mayor Clark.
Yeah, I can confirm that the design for the Splash Palace changing rooms was about 18 months, 2 years ago. For those who can recall that we had the issue about the binary or transgender population, whether they could access female toilets or not. It raised the issue that our current suite of facilities down there doesn't suit. But Alex raises a really good point. Regardless of whether we go to the railway station or anybody else, it would not harm us to have a single shower down there, which was slightly isolated from the general population, that could facilitate the homeless, which by the stats that we've got out of Wagner Place are probably less than around 3 or 4 per week, which is not much, given the opening hours of Splash Palace, and could also then cover off the transgender group, who still have an issue, given that they make up about 2% of the population. And it wouldn't be too hard in that design to put in a single shower that's able to be secured and has a very narrow use.
Yeah, I think we've done enough problem solving today as a council, and I take Trudy's point around, look, that it's a community that we really need to understand the need and how we cater for that, and I don't think we understand that. I think we're trying to mole whack around how we solve the problem without understanding the need. Tom?
Well, I was just going to comment that Alex is trying to find a way of solving a problem, and that is one way of solving the problem, but by asking the question, if that then, as a result of that, causes us to go back to the architects and change the design and so forth, then, there's quite a lot of cost involved in that. And, that single room that the Mayor's talked about will not come free. So before we do that, we should ask ourselves the question, do we actually want to direct homeless people to a swimming pool? Is that actually where we think that we
Well,
want
no,
to
we
direct?
need to go back even further than that. So
But
what are the...
before we spend money on it, if we're going to direct staff to go back and look at that, then...
But we're not.
Pardon?
We're not going to direct staff to go back and look at that.
I think we just did it.
No, we didn't. We just queried it. Okay, I've got a couple of questions which aren't related to any of that. Just in the Branksome water main, I note, and through the report, note a few times around sort of when we get into these projects, and in this one it's further unknown discoveries, which I love the wording of. So, and as I say, in the report there's a few of these discoveries where we haven't quite got solved, and I appreciate we're entering the natural environment, so sometimes that can be undiscoverable until we open it up. But are we sort of learning, particularly in infrastructure projects, around, okay, well, when we opened up this water main, we found that what we thought was there and what is actually there is different, so then do we take that to our next project? Like, what's our sort of lessons learned approach around our infrastructure projects, so we, don't get a contractor that all of a sudden opens up and says, this isn't what we contracted to do?
Absolutely, there's a learning process around it, and what I would say is Branksome isn't actually one of these, but historically we probably haven't done sufficient investigation prior to opening up a project. Now, it's a little bit of a trade-off, because obviously the more investigation we do, the more cost is associated with that. However, that obviously reduces the risks of cost overruns in the project later on when we find things that we weren't expected to. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. With a project the size of Branksome, there was quite a lot of discovery done, but because it is such an extensive route, there's obviously only so much that you can find, and a significant part of the delay around the Branksome project really came around poor soil conditions in terms of and struggling to maintain the integrity of trenching throughout the midpoint of the project, and that was also exacerbated by the quite wet weather that we had through that middle phase of this project. So that was what really contributed on that one. However, probably more so within our engineering services team, we are definitely starting to increase the amount of work that we are are doing in that space, and particularly when we start getting into projects that are in the more industrial areas, we're building our knowledge around those areas as well.
Capturing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so no further questions. So I'll take the mover and seconder to receive the report for the dashboard and the capital projects report, notes the current status of the projects and notes the likely requirement of the program contingency around Bluff boat ramp and Branks Home pipeline. Can I have a mover for that, please? Barry. Seconded, Leslie. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Nick, thanks for being patient. Welcome, Nick, and I think this is a really, really good report you've put together here. It's very clear, where we're at, and you've sort of addressed some of those concerns that were raised in previous meetings, so thank you very much for that. Is there anything you particularly want to point out before I take any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Evening, everyone, rather than afternoon now, I think it is. Look, this is a new report we put together to, as discussed at the last meeting, to give more regular reporting up to governance. Hopefully it has met the requirements as you've looked through it. I just wanted to note that the overall project team has made good progress, especially down on site over the last month. The No Love contract's going incredibly well. We've also made really good move forward with the Wahopo contract and the work that we're doing there. There was another workshop today on that, getting into more detail around the experience design. So, look, that's not to say there isn't some risks and some challenges, but we're working through those pretty quickly and as efficiently as we can. We also obviously made a commitment to come back to this group in 3 to 6 months' time once we get through this next piece of work with looking at then the potential for opening dates. So we're still looking to do that as well.
Questions? Mayor Clark?
Just an observation. When we were down having a look at the site recently, Naila Love took us through, we had some discussion about whether maybe in January or early February next year, that site could be open to the public. There's a lot of interest in the site. I spoke to the Naila Love manager on board, and he said, yep, if we did it on a Saturday or a Sunday, it could be a good PR exercise. So if that's something that could be done, I reckon that'd be great.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would expect by that sort of time frame we could have the building in a state that we could create some safe paths through the facility. I'll talk to the project team on that.
Thank you.
No further questions? Okay. We've got 2 recommendations. We'll receive the report, and thanks again, Nick. It's a really good quality report. Appreciate that. And notes the status of the project, including the project risks. All those in favour?
Aye.
Oh, actually, hang on. I need a mover and seconder. Thank you, Barry. I'm trying to speed up. Seconded. Barry, you got that? All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Where are we now? We've done alternative water, so water services delivery plan. Andrew.
Afternoon. Right, yep, so we'll just crack straight into it. So we've got a decision paper and a supporting water services delivery plan. There's a risk log that also is a separate attachment, plus our schedule of consents. So the water services delivery plan, that really reflects the decision from council back in, just go refresh, 13th of May, which was off the back of public consultation to adopt the in-house model. The direction from that meeting was to go and prepare a water services delivery plan. So the team, a cross-functional team made up of finance, infrastructure, specialists within council, plus supported by Morrison Lowe with the financial modelling. Brought together that water services delivery plan. We also had external legal support as well, go through that. The document, once drafted, we also supplied that through the DIA and received their review to the document, so that was positive. Give us a sense that we're on the right track. That update completed document now is basically presented in front of yourselves. So the statements from Morrison Lowe and our external legal, that it's a financially sustainable model that we've adopted, and the plan reflects that. There's a couple of points there that we just, we're going to be interested to just see how the DIA react, particularly around affordability in the later states of the plan. But all indications are that we're well in the financially sustainable mid-pack, so we should expecting a positive outcome, but it's all hearsay until it's actually submitted to the DIA and we receive their formal feedback. Just in terms of process from here, perhaps I'll touch on that. So if we've got the endorsement of this group, we'd also put it up to council for endorsement, and we've got a draft chief executive's commentary in there as well. So it's we need to finalise that with Michael Day, and we are looking for the ability for delegation to Michael, to the chief executive, to make minor changes to that document. Something I want to note as well, the document would eventually live on the ICC website as well as the DIA's website, so we're looking to just improve the visual appeal of the document. It's very raw in the DIA format, so we'll just do a little, make it look a bit prettier, and
I might just add, if you don't mind, Andrew. Sure. We have also included, you'll see in the paper as well as in the document, a set of strategic objectives to guide the establishment. The feedback that we got early in the days from DIA was to make sure that we didn't just document what we were already doing, that we needed to really tie what we were doing back to the strategy of what we were trying to achieve. So we've really tried to take those objectives that went through the business case that council agreed whilst we were developing the strategy, as well as those long-term plan objectives that relate to water, and we've just consolidated those into a set of objectives, both to really look at to ensure that all of those big capital projects all sit under a strategic reason, but also because, in a lot of ways we want to run this professionally and a little bit akin to as if it was a CCO, but in-house. And in the absence of a statement of expectation, we've essentially looked to use these strategic objectives to guide that establishment. So really keen to get any feedback back from the committee around those.
I mean, it's a tremendous piece of work. And obviously staff are to be commended for being able to do it so quickly and get it into a form where, we can be quite proud of this document, I think, Chair. I do have a question. Does this effectively become our 10-year long-term plan, legally?
So from a water perspective, it essentially becomes our guiding document, like our LTP, until such time as we develop a new long-term water services strategy, which is one of the requirements that we'll have in the first years of the new entity.
So the reason for the question and a little bit of concern I've got is that normally when we do an LTP, we look at all of the things that we would like to do, and then we put a sort of filter of affordability over it. This document is kind of a list of all the things we would like to do, I think without that lens of affordability. So, the thing that concerns me is that when I look at that DIA benchmark of 2.5% of median household income as being I don't know if you call it a target, but we're exceeding that. And I think, if we were doing this as an LTP process, I think we might have said to staff, look, go away and find what we need to do, the phase work, to bring it under the 2.5 or to not to exceed the DIA target. So that's on page 40 of the report. As I said, it just seems to me that it would have benefited from that sort of lens of affordability as well as the things that we would like to do. And that's therefore my question, Chair. Do we become legally bound to this?
I'm happy to take the first part of that question. And I absolutely agree, and it would have been a whole lot more helpful if we were able to prepare this at the same time as we were preparing preparing the long-term plan. What it does is essentially, because it is out of sequence with the long-term plan, is primarily reflect our existing long-term plan, which has had that affordability lens over it. There are just some of those few changes from the long-term plan, which are essentially the things that were agreed through the annual plan process to come into it. But apart from that, it really does reflect that long-term plan and annual planning process. But absolutely something that we will need to align to going forward as well. In terms of whether or not it becomes binding, it is essentially a statement back to the Department of Internal Affairs as to how we expect to meet the legislative requirements. If there was something that we decided not to do, and then they would be really looking to our very key explanation as to how we planned to still meet the legislative requirements without taking that step if we planned to do something different. But really what they'll be looking at is, do we meet the legislation?
My question then is, when we come to do the long-term plan next year, do we consider, water in the same way that we'd consider other items, or do we have to take this? Because I think if this had been delivered maybe a month or 2 months ago, I'd probably say, look, can you take it back and look if we can stick to 2.5 in the outer years? It's too late to do that now because we've really got to get it signed off. But do we have an opportunity to do that through the LTP or not?
Tricia?
Yeah, through you, Chair. At the moment, it appears that we will not, that the water will be done separately from the long-term plan water will be divorced from the long-term plan. We are still waiting on regulations and guidance from the government as to how that will work in practice, but it is a risk that we have noted in the long-term plan development already. Well, you say you'll deal with it next year. We've been working as a project team with staff already for nearly 12 months on the next LTP.
So just following that up then, so what we've done in the long-term plan, we've got, what's the cost associated with this type of service? That's around the 1.9% of...
So this document reflects what we had in the long-term plan as amended by the annual plan. That has just been, so we've used that data and kept it through. So we've got that consistency with a long-term plan. There is some additional standards that DIA put in around affordability that were on top for water, that were on top of what our normal affordability measures have been for the whole of council. And that's where this delivery plan sets those through.
And have also come later in the piece.
And have the DIA given any indication, on this is probably an Andrew or Erin question, around, so, I mean, they've been clear they don't want it underfunded and they want it prioritised as council, part of using rates money, but have they given any indication to date around the flexibility available, within this entity to sort of manage that a bit like we have done with rates generally?
In all honesty, DIA have been fairly clear to us that they will be watching very clearly how we deliver against our water service delivery plans, and that they will be watching us particularly closely as a council that has elected to go with an in-house model.
Something I'll add to that as well is that my expectation is the DIA will wait until those plans come in, understand what the spread is across the councils, and deal with the outliers. So we're not expecting that we would be in that category.
And sorry, the other thing I would note is that the regulatory provisions of the Commerce Commission are still to come.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's interesting. Trish.
Just a comment, please. Andrew, thank you. This was a very readable report, and for someone like me who doesn't have the background or the scientific background, I found it really good. I could actually follow my way through and understand it as best as I can. So thank you, and your team.
Yep. I'll put that to the likes of Russell and Co.
Look, I was going to just ask what happened to the heating in the room, but very interested in our Bluff wastewater consent, so it'd be interesting to see how that affects our governance model.
Leslie.
Thanks, Mr Chair. Look, just going back to that DIA's suggested benchmark, and can I just say, I think having read the 81 pages, it's a very good report, timely, well set out. But on that particular issue, what it actually says is the financial projections included in our water services plan see average residential water charges increasing from 1.9 of median household income to 2.8 of median household income by 2034. So we actually have quite a few years, to test the reality of that 2.8. This will see increasing affordability challenges for the community. However, at 2.8, affordability is still within industry benchmarks, and I know that I checked it, gave me some comfort, and isn't significantly higher than DIA's suggested benchmark of 2.5. And DIA's suggested benchmark is a suggested benchmark. We could see that alter to say 2.7 or 2.8. And then the next paragraph there is, we're not projecting to breach borrowing limits over the next 30 years as a council. We may have some flexibility, and I suggest we will have some flexibility to further fund some of the capital works program with debt to alleviate the affordability issues if necessary. I'm just comfortable with what we've got in there at the moment about that particular issue. I think we've gone as far as we can to show a very reasonable plan that DIA is requiring and to cover off all the issues that DIA was likely to question if we didn't have referrals in there. So I think congratulations to staff. I think it's a very well put together water services delivery plan. Yes, I think DIA will look at it carefully. DIA have already indicated some level of feeling that Invercargill City Council is probably very well placed to be a council who's progressing this way. Yep.
Right, thank you. So look, just endorse the committee's sentiments around the quality of this information report. So thank you to all involved, Erin and Andrew and all the team. Well done. So we've got some recommendations there, which is adopting this water service delivery plan and the attachments, which is in accordance with the Act 2024 and submitted to the Secretary of Local Government by 3rd September for acceptance. Notes the Chief Executive must certify the plan complies with the requirements and the information contained in the plan is true and accurate. Delegates to the Chief Executive the authority to make any minor editorial design changes to the plan. Authorises the Chief Executive to submit the certified plan to the Secretary for Local Government. Review and acceptance. Notes the resolutions, including the date of adoption, included in the documentation submitted, and notes the Chief Executive's commentary on the water services delivery plan. Can I have a mover? Thanks, Trish. Seconder. Thanks, Leslie. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay. Well done, team. We got through that. Thank you. So, Erin, you need to get away, do you?
One more in public excluded,
Okay.
but I will step away.
Can I have someone move?
I'll move into public excluded,
Thank you.
Mr Chair.
And the reasons for it. Harry, all those in favour?